gratitude is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may He send infinite salutations, peace and blessings upon His beloved, our Master, Sayyiduna wa Habibuna, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Indeed, it is a great honor and privilege that we are hosting a very talented scholar here today on a very important topic. And basically this kind of topics are brushed under the carpet, and we are addressing the elephant in the room, and that is the matter of finance and economy and mu'amalat, matters which are related in between people. And inshallah ta'ala, we have a very interesting and intriguing lecture planned for you today, which will be delivered by our guest Mufti Muhammad Kalim Misbahi, hafidhullah ta'ala. But before we do, inshallah, because of course this is not your conventional program, but we will start off with the recitation of the Quran. So for that, I would like to call forward my young brother, Hafiz Ihtisham. Jazakumullah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس، ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا، فمن جاءه موعظة من ربه فانتهى فله ما سلف وأمره إلى الله، ومن عاد فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. يمحق الله الربا ويربي الصدقات، والله لا يحب كل كفار أثيم. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وأقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة لهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وذروا ما بقي من الربا إن كنتم مؤمنين، فإن لم تفعلوا فأذنوا بحرب من الله ورسوله، وإن تبتم فلكم رؤوس أموالكم لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Relevant verses recited by Hafiz Ihtisham in relation to our subject matter today, MashaAllah ta'ala. Very brief introduction, inshaAllah ta'ala. The deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, contrary to common perception, is not limited to ritual and prayer. Rather, the deen of Allah, Islam, transcends ritual and prayer. And the fact that the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a holistic, multifaceted, multi-dimensional religion. And this is substantiated with the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via the Sharia has given me and you precise injunctions, commands and laws that govern our day-to-day lives. Every single aspect of our life is governed by the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore, from the aspects of our life, we can basically categorize aspects of our life into two. You have the ibadat and you have the muamalat. The ibadat, which are ritual prayer, and muamalat is our conduct with people. And so therefore, the common perception that as soon as we exit the masjid, we can do how we want. We can do what we want. That is incorrect, because we are Muslim for every single moment of our life, and every single little minutiae, every little iota of our deen has been explained to me and you. So much so that Sayyiduna Salman radiallahu anhu, he was mocked and ridiculed by the Jews. They said that, is it so that your Prophet has even explained the etiquettes of going to the bathroom and toilet? And Sayyidina Salman said, yes, with pride, that this is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is holistic and it is multi-dimensional. Every single facet of it has been explained to me and you. And so therefore, commerce and trade is also that which Islam talks about and gives us rules and regulations. Some people may think that I don't trade, right? I do not trade, I'm not in that part of business, I don't do commerce. That's incorrect. Every single day, me and you engage in commerce. We purchase something. Do we know the ethics behind that in terms of Islam? Do we know, was that an ethical or moral purchase in light of the Quran and the Sunnah of Sayyiduna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Do we know? If not, then mashallah, today we are going to be enlightened with the topic of Islamic finance. What is the structure? What is the framework of Islamic finance? This will be explained by our guest today, mashallah, a talented scholar, Mufti Muhammad Kalim Misbahi. He is, mashallah ta'ala, also a graduate of university. He has an LLB in law, mashallah. He also has a special takhassus, which is basically when you specialize in fiqh, right? So he graduated from Al-Jami'at Al-Ashrafiyah. He studied with his father, Allama Yunus Misbahi, Hafidullah, from Preston, and he is continuing to, in particular, this topic that we have in front of us, Islamic finance. He's currently, he's doing his research on this topic. So, alhamdulillah, it's our honor and privilege to host him here. Without any further ado, again, as I mentioned, it's not a conventional program. We have like a Garbi Sharif, but still, our tradition is there. So, Nare Takbir, Nare Risalat, Ulama Ahle Sunnah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. With love and affection, beside durood and salam upon the best of creation. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammadin ma'adil al-judi wal karam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallim. Alhamdulillah, the fact that you have all come today to learn about what Islam has to say about business and finance is very commendable. Because if we look at the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned that there will come a time upon the people when a man will not care where he gets his wealth from, whether the source of that wealth is halal or whether the source of that wealth is haram. This is in Bukhari Sharif, and Imam Bukhari has actually included this hadith under the section discussing the Quranic verse on Riba, on interest. So if you analyze this hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we will see that in this day and age, this hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is very true. We have seen it come to life in our own lifetime. That every single day we see people, they involve themselves in so many things which according to Islam is haram, which according to Islam is not permissible, yet they don't care. And the reason why they don't care is because of the deterioration of deen or righteousness within the person. Because of this deterioration, they don't care. So if we look at this hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we need to think, do you act like this? Do you gather your wealth and do you do whatever investments that you want? And you don't care whether it's halal or whether it's haram, you don't care? Are you part of this hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Okay, if so, that's why we're here today. Yes, we're here today so that we can at least not be like this, that we don't care about the source of our wealth. So the ultimate purpose of today is so we can learn about the halal and haram in business specifically and in finance generally, so that we can keep our wealth halal. We want to keep our wealth halal. Okay? And an interesting point to mention, which I was just reading when I was preparing, and I came across a quote of Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah ta'ala, who is the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, our Imam in Fiqh, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala. He is his direct student, and he is the reason for which the madhab, the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, has spread far and wide. He was the one who compiled all of the edicts, the fatawa, and the statements of Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, he has a book, it's called Kitab al-Asal. Okay, he has all of the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa and also the opinions of Imam Muhammad and also Imam Abu Yusuf, who is also another student of Imam Abu Hanifa. So he has written this entire book, and it's about fiqh, yes, talking about tahara as well as nikah, talaq, and all mu'amalah, business-related matters. And when he was asked that you've written on everything, why have you not written on zuhd? Okay, zuhd means to renounce the world, asceticism. Yes, to renounce the world and to not be involved in the dunya to the point where it consumes you is what zuhd means, the word. To renounce the world, to not be consumed by wealth. So yes, why have you not written about zuhd? So Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani gave a very interesting answer. I found it very interesting. He says, I have written Kitabul Buyu. Okay, I have written the chapter on business transactions. And he said, if zuhd is not learning about the halal and haram with regards to your wealth, then what else is zuhd? Yes, so zuhd is renouncing the dunya, where some people frame it to the point where we shouldn't take from the dunya, and the dunya is inherently evil, for example, or wealth is inherently evil. Islam doesn't have that mindset. We will discuss about what Islam says about wealth. But Imam Muhammad, he mentions that just learning about the halal and haram in business, so you can stop your wealth from becoming haram, this itself is zuhd. So today, according to Imam Muhammad, we are learning about zuhd. Okay, we are learning about how to abandon the dunya by way of learning about halal and haram, specifically in business transactions. Now, just a disclaimer from the start, this area is slightly somewhat technical or intricate. You can ask the ulama here that when they study this chapter of Kitab al-Buyu, okay, business transactions, when they study this chapter, the books of fiqh, it's very technical and it has a lot of intricate details and very minute details that usually makes it very complex. And one change in something can make something halal or haram. Yes? So it's a very technical area, so you have to pay attention and try to follow along. I will try to simplify all of the concepts as much as I can. I will try to do that, and if there is a question, then note it down, inshallah, and in the end, we'll try to take some questions if there's time. And in particular, you have notebooks in front of you. Try to make notes on certain points. This will be helpful for you, inshallah. Today, what I have planned will be a summary of the entire Islamic business and finance in general. A good summary, and inshallah, if you pay attention to it and you learn it, then inshallah you will have a very good understanding of how Islamic finance and business works. Okay? Just a brief overview you can see of the layout for today is we've got 5 sections in particular. The last section is about a different approach that I want to suggest, a different framework and a mindset that I want to give, especially to the youngsters. So the first section we look at is Islam and wealth. What does Islam have to say about wealth? Okay. The second section we look at is Islamic business law, which is Kitab al-Buyu. We look at that generally, what it relates to. What is Islamic business law? What does it cover? Okay. Then we will look at Islamic finance principles. Okay, the principles that govern the entirety of Islamic finance and trade and business. All of the principles that relate to it, inshallah, we'll look at those. And then we'll look at specific areas that everyone is very interested in generally, such as banking, and we've got cryptocurrency as well. We've got stocks and shares that we're going to look at, and we'll also look at real estate as well, inshallah, property. So we've got these areas, and then the last one will be an approach that I will give you, inshallah, that you can use in your day-to-day life, how to deal with finance and how to avoid all of the controversies and all of the clutter that we see in the modern world today. How do we avoid that? Okay, so inshallah we'll discuss that. So we'll go through this. Before I continue, I want to mention methodology. Okay, before we get into the actual discussion for today, I want to mention methodology. This is very important, and the reason why it's very important is I deal with this on a day-to-day basis, and I deal with people that are involved in these kind of fields. And you see, most of the time they are referring or talking about, when they discuss some matter, then they refer non-Sunni scholars. Okay, those scholars that don't belong to the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And let me give you a principle, an usul that you can live by. As a commoner, we are tasked with consulting the ulama. When there is a matter, you ask the ulama. And the answer that the alim gives you, that is the answer, or that is the action that you will do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. If you don't know something, then ask the people of knowledge. They will give you guidance, and you need to act upon it. But when it's mentioned about ulama, okay, when we say we have to ask the ulama, it's not any alim. Okay, it has to be from the Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Because those who are not from the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, those who are not Sunni scholars, we can't rely on them. Because they themselves do not follow the correct madhab, or do not follow the correct sect, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. How can we rely on their fatwas in fiqh? Okay, so this is a very important principle to mention with regards to methodology. When you're dealing with this area, when you're looking at stuff online in particular, okay, unverified fatwas, unverified opinions, people on YouTube, people on TikTok, people on Instagram telling you all sorts of things. Who are these people? Okay, are they ulama? Are they Sunni ulama? Who are they? If you're taking from these people, you can't take from them unless they are Sunni ulama that are giving you these positions. Then you can't take from anyone else. It's very important to mention this, because every single time I deal with this area where I answer a question, then someone says, but so-and-so, XYZ says this. Okay? It's not relevant to us. What is relevant to us is what do the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah scholars say. So remember this methodology, that don't rely on unverified opinions and positions. And if you're not sure about something, it's better to stay on the side of caution and not get involved in it until you can ask an actual Sunni alim a position with regards to what you're trying to do. Then stay away from that area. Okay, this is the most cautious way that a person can adopt. Unless the Sunni alim has given you this position or fatwa, don't rely on any of the random positions that you see online. It's not permissible to do that. Okay. Another point to mention is the rise of weak scholarship. And what I mean by weak scholarship is that we see people online. Okay. Now, to use the word scholarship for them is the insult to scholarship. But the reason why I mention it is because they appear like that. Okay, they appear as scholars or as people who have some sort of ijazah, authority to do something in the field of Islam. Yes, you need ijazah, you need permission, and you have to have studied, okay, with the ulama in order to be able to even get to this position, to be able to even speak on the matters of the religion. And you have to be extremely cautious, because when you're sat here, you're sat on the minbar of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and whatever you say, you're held responsible. Okay, but nowadays we have the minbar is in the house. Okay, on TikTok and Instagram, people just record whatever they want. People who have studied for a few years, for example, and they begin to give fatwa online, or they begin to give answers with regards to any matter they want. Okay, this is a big problem within our society, and the reason why it's a big problem is because most of the youth, they don't have this methodology. No one's taught them this methodology, that you can't rely on these people. Who are they? Who is this random person on YouTube? Who is this random person on Instagram? Who is this person? Okay, is he a verified Sunni scholar? If not, then his opinion is irrelevant. So keep this in your mind all the time. If it is not Sunni scholarship, if it is not Sunni ulama giving you a position, you can't rely on it. Okay, if you rely on it, you will be held responsible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you did not ask the scholars of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You asked a deviant, a misguided person instead, or you relied on the position of a misguided person. So keep this in mind, this methodology, every time you're dealing with any matter, not just business and finance and Islamic finance. But the reason why I mention it in the context of Islamic finance is because most of the content online is not from Sunni scholarship. Okay, most of it is not from Sunni scholarship. It's from other people. And many times, it's not even from those who follow even one of the madhahib. Okay, it's from those who don't follow any of the madhahib. And how madhahib is the schools. Yes, 4 schools that we have of fiqh. Imam Abu Hanifa, the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, the school of Imam Malik, the school of Imam Shafi'i, and the school of Imam Ahmad ibn Muhammad. Okay, these are the schools of fiqh that we have. But we have people online that don't follow any of these schools and they follow their own opinions. Okay, how can you rely on people like that? So keep this in your mind every single time dealing with any matter, especially this, because it relates to your wealth. It relates to halal and haram. Nobody wants their wealth, especially the fact that you've come today, you don't want your wealth to be haram. Nobody wants their wealth to be haram. Everybody wants their wealth to be pure. So inshallah we'll look at these principles, but like I said, ignore non-Sunni scholarship. That's not relevant to us. And today I'm not even going to mention the different positions that other people have. I might mention it in terms of a critique, okay? But I won't mention it with regards to relying on their position. I might mention it to compare, but I won't mention with regards to giving you that position that you can act upon it. Just to compare them. Inshallah we'll look at that. So the first section that I want to look at is Islam and wealth. If you read the hadith that's there of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there is a fitna for every ummah. Every ummah has a challenge, a specific challenge and a specific trial. And the trial and the tribulation and the challenge for this ummah is wealth. Okay, it's mal. Wealth, this is the biggest challenge for this ummah. And you can see in this day and age how people basically are consumed by amassing wealth, and all they think about every single time is just about how to make the most money. It doesn't matter whether it's halal or haram, how to make the most money. And this is a challenge that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this will happen, okay, towards the end of times. So we look at the concept of Islam and wealth, as in what does Islam say about wealth? How do we understand wealth in the context of Islam? So I've put some points there that you have to have the correct mindset as regards to wealth. Okay, it's important to have this mindset in your mind when you're dealing with your wealth in particular. Because our aim as Muslims, okay, is not to amass as much wealth as we can. That's not our aim. Okay, Allah did not send us on this earth so that we can amass as much wealth as we can and then don't care whether it's halal or haram. It doesn't matter to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not made that our purpose. Okay, so our aim in this world is not that. But we have to earn. We understand that without earning, how are you going to live and how are you going to survive? So I've mentioned the point there that you have to earn enough to provide for yourself, to provide for your family, and to be able to cover the basic costs that you have. This is obligatory upon every single person to earn that much, because you have an obligation to your family. You have to provide for them. So Islam says that it's obligatory for you to seek at least that much wealth. So that much wealth becomes obligatory. And then anything that is beyond that, earning anything that is beyond your basic essentials and what you have to provide, who you have to provide for, if you do that, then the rest of it is your choice. Okay, the rest of it is your own choice whether you want to earn more, right? But when we earn more, what happens? When a person continues to earn more, wealth seeps into his heart, okay, to the point where he's consumed by the dunya. And when he's consumed by the dunya, he doesn't care. He doesn't care whether that is halal or that is haram. He will try to justify it in any way possible, and that's it. Because the world is such that once it takes over your heart, then there's no way going back. Okay, there's no way to go back except by doing tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and building this righteousness within yourself. So you have to remove it from your heart. Okay, so wealth, earning it to the extent that you have to fulfill your basic obligations, fard. Beyond that, Islam gives you a choice. But when it gives you a choice, it puts a condition. That make sure that you are not consumed by it to the point where you don't care whether something is halal or whether something is haram. Don't get to that stage. So what the ulama mentioned, and I've summarized it for you from what the Quran, the Sunnah, and the way of the Sahaba, and in particular what the awliya of Allah have said. Because the awliya of Allah are very particular with regards to wealth and what they have said as well. I've summarized it all for you from what Imam al-Sha'rani, what he has mentioned as well in particular. If you remove it from your heart, in wealth, the love of wealth, remove it from your heart, but you keep it in your hand, you use it for your benefit, then it doesn't harm you, it has no effect on you. Okay? As soon as it gets into your heart, as soon as it consumes you, then it takes over a person to the point where greed becomes the main source of a person's life. And when greed is the main source of a person's life, then he distances himself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. he begins to not fulfill his obligations, he begins to neglect his obligations, because wealth is such that it's a very big challenge. And when you are challenged with it, it's a tribulation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you what you're going to do. So you have to be very careful with wealth. So if you keep it in your hand, you don't let it get into your heart, then fine. Okay, there's no issue with that. As soon as you let it get into your heart, then you have trouble, you have problems, because you're going to begin to negate the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I mentioned a point about detaching yourself from wealth. Because true asceticism, which is mentioned about zuhud, okay, which is renouncing the world, renouncing the dunya, it's a concept mentioned in the hadith as well. It does not require that a person abandons their wealth entirely. It doesn't require that, okay? It doesn't mean that you just completely sit at home and do nothing and have no wealth. It doesn't mean that. But rather what it means is that you ensure that the wealth of this world, it remains detached from your heart. Okay, so the example that I like to give is like a vessel, it's like a ship. Okay, as long as the ship is sealed and it's traveling on the water, in the ocean, in the sea, and there's no holes inside the ship, then the ship will stay afloat. Okay, but the water is all around it. Okay, in the same way, your heart is like this vessel. Okay, as long as the dunya, you're attached to the dunya. Yes, everyone is attached to the dunya to some extent. But as long as you keep the dunya outside your heart, okay, you don't let it get into your heart, then you're fine. As soon as you let it get into your heart, and there's a hole in your heart because of it, then you begin to drown. Okay, so this is the concept that Islam has with regards to wealth, that you need to detach your heart from it, and then you can take as much of it as you can in a halal way, but detach your heart from it. Don't make it so that you're consumed by it. But how do you do that? How does a person do that? The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, okay, in the famous hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked about wealth, and he said, "La ba'sa bil ghina liman ittaqa." There is no issue, or there is no problem with riches, okay, or being rich and wealthy. There's no issue with that. For who? For the one who has taqwa. Okay, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam put this condition first. So what that means is you have to have taqwa first. You have to build taqwa. You have to build the fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, being aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. Build that taqwa first. Then when you get involved in wealth, then you won't be drowned and consumed by the dunya. Greed won't take over. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned the condition. Yes? La ba'sa bil ghina liman ittaqa. Okay, for the one who is pious, for the one who is righteous. That means that you have to build righteousness first before you get involved with wealth. You can analyze it yourself. You know many people, we all know many people that are very wealthy, have a lot of money, okay, but they don't have taqwa. And because they don't have taqwa, this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't matter what they do with their wealth. Yes, they will spend it in haram, they will do all sorts of haram with it, and they will get it in haram ways as well. They will acquire it in haram ways as well, because they don't have this taqwa. So Islam says, fine, you can get involved in wealth, and you can take as much wealth of this dunya as you want. Yes, keep it in your hand, don't keep it in your heart. And before you even do that, build taqwa. Build this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that every move that you make in business or whatever it may be related to your money, you always fear. What does Islam say about this? Maybe my wealth will become haram. Every single time you fear, then you'll be safe. But if you don't build this taqwa, then you'll be drowned and be consumed by the wealth of this dunya. So this is the general concept with regards to Islam and wealth. I just want to mention a specific verse of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِيهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran with regards to men, people in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who don't let business and trade, meaning they're involved in it, but they don't let the business and trade distance them from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they continue to pray the salah, they continue to give zakah, they continue to do all of the obligations, but they are involved in the dunya. They're involved in business and trade. Islam doesn't say it's not allowed. Yes, that's what we're discussing today, about the extent of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Islam doesn't say it's not allowed. So clearly it's allowed, but if you let it distance yourself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it becomes not allowed for you, impermissible for you. If it moves you away from the obligations, and if it takes you towards haram, then it becomes impermissible, okay, to involve yourself in that manner. So the next topic we're going to look at, or the next point I'm going to mention, is what I term the Rizq Principle. Okay, this is part of a framework that I've developed with regards to how to deal with your wealth. Okay, how to deal with investments from an Islamic perspective and using prophetic principles. And this is one of the principles that I've mentioned and that I've included in this framework, and I'm going to mention it here today so that you can build the right mindset. The Rizq Principle is it concerns your provisions. Okay? Your provision, your sustenance, what you will get, yes, your wealth, is written, is decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? You will receive every single thing that is written for you, every morsel, every single penny, every single pound that is written for you, you will receive it in your lifetime. It's never the case that you can get more than that, and it's never the case you can get less than that. Allah has decreed that for you, so you will always get it. But the path that you choose, to acquire that wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you, that's left to you. And when you decide to go down the haram route, then that wealth becomes haram. When you decide to go down the halal route, that same wealth becomes halal. When you go down the halal route, it becomes halal. When you go down the haram route, it becomes haram. Okay? It's the same wealth that was decreed to you for you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the way what you choose decides whether it's going to be halal or whether it's going to be haram. Now let me give you an example with regards to this to put into context for you. If let's say an individual like Zayd, okay, a general name Zayd, he buys a lottery ticket and he wins £1 million. Okay? He's won £1 million. £1 million has come into his bank account. Now he has possession of this £1 million. Okay? Now, people who don't have this understanding from an Islamic perspective, they will say, if Zayd didn't do the lottery, then he wouldn't have £1 million. But because he did the lottery, he has £1 million. Okay? Islamically, that's not true. Zayd, even if he did not do the lottery, the fact that that money came to him in the first place, it means it was decreed to him, decreed for him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he did something else, Allah would have still given him that £1 million. He still would have come because it was written for him. The fact that he got it in the first place means that it was written for him, it was decreed for him. So this mindset, if you build this mindset that this investment is not permissible, or this investment is controversial, there's difference of opinion on it, for example, it's better to avoid it, for example, but in your head you think, if I do this I can make this much money. If I do this, I can make this much money. But if you have this mindset, that whatever is written for me, it doesn't matter if it's whatever I do, I will always get it. Okay, so it stops you from going down the route of haram because of the fact that you'll always get it from some other way. Allah will create the halal way for you to get that wealth. So always keep this in your mind. When it comes to investments, sometimes we think that we might as well do this and then make as much money as we can because I can make money from this. And then you think that because if you don't do this, you won't make money. That's not true. Okay, if it's decreed for you, you will get it in a halal way. So this mindset, if you build this mindset, then you will stop yourself from going down so many haram avenues. And this is what I like to teach people when people ask about this kind of stuff. And I say to them, follow the Rizq Principle. Try to acquire it in a halal way. Whatever is written for you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you. Stay away from all of these other methods that we'll look at, inshallah. Stay away from all of them to keep your wealth free from all sorts of controversy. Okay, and in a more serious, to a more serious extent, haram. Okay, because there are certain things that make wealth completely haram. Okay, so we have to avoid that. So understand this mindset. So now that we've built the mindset, we've understood what Islam has to say about wealth, how we're supposed to deal with it. We're going to look at, inshallah, the business law in particular. So the first section I put is the fiqh of business. Okay, it's Kitab al-Buyu. In the books of fiqh in particular, there is a section called Buyu. Okay, business transactions. This chapter, it covers all matters related to business transactions. Whatever you can think of related to business is covered in these texts. Now you might think that 500 years ago, how can the jurists decide a matter that wasn't in their time? Okay, all of the new matters, new financial matters and products that exist, how can the fuqaha decide that? Okay, all of it is based on generic principles. There are core criteria that exist, and then the ulama can use those core criteria to discuss and to analyze new matters. So if you look at the fiqh of business, Kitab al-Buyu, you can see what it covers. It covers every single thing related to business and trade. Okay? So it covers the conditions of transactions. What are the conditions of when a transaction will be valid or invalid? There are certain shariah, certain conditions that are mentioned. It discusses about valid contracts. What is a valid contract? Okay? In the modern context, if you look at the business law of the world, they have offer, acceptance, and consideration. Okay, meaning you have to give, there's an offer, acceptance, and then you have to give a certain amount of money in order for the contract to be valid. Okay, the Sharia already has these principles as well. Yes, ijab and qabul, offer and acceptance. That's covered as well about the extent of what does offer mean, what does acceptance mean, when is it valid, when is it invalid. Okay, he has discussions on item and price. What can be an item Islamically? What can be a price? What can be given as a price Islamically? There's also discussions on the option to return. Okay, to return something, you can put a condition that if this product has a fault in it, I'm going to return it. Okay, these are khiyar. There's options as well. Okay, there's a whole discussion on invalid transactions and void transactions. When someone does something against the Islamic criteria, when does a transaction become invalid? When does a transaction become void? And then there is a section on loans and credits. Okay, when can a person give a loan? Can he make money on top of the loan? When is it interest? When is it not interest? There's a whole section on that. And then there is a section on made-to-order items. Okay, when you give something to someone to make, it doesn't exist, but you want to have it made, there's a whole section on that, and rules and criteria for that. And then you have rulings for money exchange. Okay, what is the extent and what are the conditions of how you can exchange money, in particular gold and silver, what are the criteria for it. And then there is the discussion on partnerships. Okay, Islamic partnerships. When are there valid partnerships? And then there are discussions on Ijarah, which is renting and leasing. Okay. Then there is a discussion on collateral and security, which is the rihan. Okay. And then there are discussions on agency and commissions. When can you make someone an agent to do something on your behalf? When can a person take commission to do something on your behalf? There's all of these criteria. The reason why I mentioned this here and I put this here, as was mentioned in the introduction, Islam doesn't just cover about tahara and salah and ibadat, that's it. Okay, this is how you do wudu, this is how you pray salah. Islam doesn't cover that, just that. Okay, it also covers your life with regards to business and trade. All of it is covered by Islam. All of the rules are there. The fuqaha, the jurists, they've extracted all of these rules from the Quran and the Sunnah so that you can do business and trade in line with Islam. It's all covered. As you can see, all of these topics are covered in the books of fiqh and they relate to everything that we have today. Okay, so all of the criteria already exist. So then, if these criteria exist, it's clear that the books of fiqh obviously don't mention about new matters. Okay, they don't mention about new things, for example, cryptocurrency, stocks, shares. It's not specifically discussed in the books of fiqh because it didn't exist in that time. So then, how do we decide and how do we know what to do with regards to those matters? So I've put a section here about new matters. Okay, what do we do with regards to new matters with regards to finance? Okay, all new matters, they are decided using these points and principles that are in the books of fiqh. The criteria that I mentioned before, all of the chapters that we have, they exist. They have all of the principles, they have all of the points. So all of the new matters, when they arise, the ulama, they use the criteria that already exist, the 4 principles that exist in the books of fiqh, and then they decide whether something is in line with that or whether something is against that. That's how the ulama decide new matters. And in particular, this is used by ulama specifically, yes, not by anyone. Anyone can't decide what they want to do. Okay, there has to be some sort of adaptability framework. Yes, because things that were existing 500 years ago, there are new matters that exist today. How are we supposed to analyze that? So there has to be some sort of adaptability that exists, okay, in order for us to be able to understand what we can do. So there are certain criteria that the ulama have, and that is necessity, when something becomes a necessity in life, that we can't live without it. And one example that I want to give at this very moment in time, and we'll discuss it in detail when we get to the section on banking. Necessity, with the ulama, they look at certain things. Islam says it's not allowed, but it becomes so difficult to avoid that thing that we have to allow it by way of necessity. And the prime example I want to give here is fiat currency. Okay, fiat currency, money and notes, okay, bank notes that are made, okay, they aren't real currency like gold and silver. Okay, we know that. But they exist, we use them. And it's based purely on interest. Yes, money is based purely on interest. Are we going to say now that to use money entirely is haram? If we say that, how are people supposed to live life? Okay, so the fact that fiat currency is based on interest in particular, okay, but because of necessity in this day and age, without it you can't do anything, then it's allowed by way of necessity to use fiat currency to do your day-to-day dealings, okay, to use money to do your day-to-day dealings is permissible out of necessity. So there are criteria that exist Yes, the ulama have this criteria and they know this criteria. So they know when certain things will have to be changed based on this criteria. Not every person can do this kind of thing. It's for the ulama. Okay, and those who are at the elite level, who have this level of research, they can do this kind of assessment. So we have these kind of principles, because a lot of people ask how we're supposed to decide. We've got some questions, inshallah, at the end. We look at the questions, and I've read through those questions, and some people have written certain points. And their point is, how can we say everything is not allowed, and we say this matter is like this, and this matter is like this. Then it wasn't discussed before how the ulama are supposed to decide now. Okay, so it's not the case that the ulama don't have this framework. They have a framework. Okay, we have necessity, we have common practice. When something becomes a common practice within society, and it does not go against the Quran and the Sunnah explicitly, but it goes against one of the conditions that the fuqaha have written, and there is some level of adaptability that the ulama can have this flexibility, okay, because it's not a matter that goes against the core principles, and we have to allow it because it's become so common to the point where it would be difficult if we don't allow it. Okay, a prime example that I can give for this is warranties or guarantees. Okay, when we buy an appliance, we get a guarantee, yes, a warranty. For 1 year, for 2 years, for 5 years, whatever it may be, we get warranties and guarantees. Okay, now technically there are certain aspects, okay, and certain conditions that cannot be included in a business transaction. Okay, but the ulama, because of the fact that it has become so common to the point where without it, you can't do anything. Okay, every product has a warranty, every product has a guarantee. So the ulama, they permit it out of this criteria or this framework, a common practice. It becomes so common and doesn't go against any core principle of Islam, so it becomes permissible. So there are criteria that the ulama have. It's not the case that the ulama just they don't have this kind of framework. They have a very strict framework that they can use. Okay, and certain points I mentioned about common good within society is called maslaha, and there's widespread corruption within society which is called mafsada. Okay, there are different kind of criteria. I don't want to get into the details of these kind of criteria because the ulama use them. I just want to mention them here just so you have an idea that the ulama, they have a framework. They know what to do when something becomes a necessity and when something becomes a need. It's not the case that they will just decide that something becomes permissible or is impermissible. They don't do it out of their own desire. That's the point I want to mention, because many people have this kind of mindset. With the ulama, they just say this is not allowed, this is not allowed, whereas what we're supposed to do. Okay? They already know about the Quran and the Sunnah. So keep this in mind about what the new matters and how they are dealt with. The next section is on Islamic finance principles. Okay? These are principles, these are important principles that we will see time and time again. All of the matters, they relate to that. Okay? They relate to these kind of principles. So there are different principles that exist in Islamic finance and business in particular, and the overall aim of it, the overall aim of what governs this area is to create a fair and just system, okay, to create a fair and just society. If you look at all of the ethics and all of the principles I'm going to mention, you will see that the whole purpose of them and the underlying rationale behind them is to create a fair and just society, in particular with regards to business and transactions. Okay, so, and the main reason is so that people don't take unfair advantage of one another. Okay, because if people start to take unfair advantage of one another, what happens? Society begins to deteriorate, and there's so many problems that happen within society. If you look at the Western system, the capitalist system, look at the way it works. Okay, they prey on those who are desperate by way of giving them loans, and then when they can't pay those loans, then they take their house away and then they sell the house for very cheap. Okay, they bank on people's desperation. Islam doesn't want people to do that. So Islam has a framework, and the framework that exists in Islam is about fair and just. Okay, to create a fair and just society, especially with regards to business and transactions. All of the principles we're going to discuss, they all relate to this. So the two types of principles, I've separated them. Okay, one is related to ethics or ethical conduct, how you're supposed to deal with people on a day-to-day, because we're talking about specifically business in the context of business. And then there's a specific section that we're going to look at with regards to fiqh principles, okay, where the rules of fiqh are based on certain criteria that exist, certain principles that exist in order to create this fair and just society and system. So the first section on ethics, the first point I've mentioned here is no lying. Okay, lying, deception, and stealing. Okay, Islam says no to all of these in business transactions. Okay, because when you lie to someone, when a person is buying something from you, he expects you to tell him the truth with regards to that product. When you lie to him, then what you have done is you have taken his wealth from him. You have taken his wealth from him without him giving you permission to take his wealth in that manner. Okay? Because he wanted to buy, for example, a brand new laptop from you, and you sold him a used laptop. The transaction that happened between you and him was with regards to a new laptop, not with regards to a used laptop. But you deceived him and sold him a used laptop. So that money for you is not halal anymore, because it wasn't based on this person's consent. So Islam says you can't lie. Islam says you can't deceive people in business transactions. Islam says you can't steal people's wealth. You can't just take someone's wealth. You have to have some sort of dealing with that person. Either he gives it to you, either he lets you borrow it, either he gives it to you on rent, yes, either he sells it to you, whatever it may be. Islam says you have to transfer with his consent. You can't just take it yourself. So these are conduct principles, ethical principles, and these are all derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. As the ulama derive this from the Quran and the Sunnah, because if you look at these principles, the whole point of them is to create this fair and just society that we've been talking about. We see that the ethics and the conduct that you're supposed to have is supposed to create this society. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions these points in the Quran in different places, but specifically with regards to business and trade, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu amwalakum baynakum bil batil illa an takuna tijaratan an taradin minkum. Okay, do not take one another's wealth without any right. Okay, do not steal it. Do not take it without any right, except that you do some type of business transaction with the person's consent. So the Quran mentions about consent. That's why the ulama, when they looked at this verse of the Quran, they were able to derive a ruling that business transactions require consent of both parties, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about consent. Okay, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that you can't take someone's wealth without having a right. So that means that it's not permissible for a person to take anyone's wealth without having some sort of right and claim to it. And there's only certain ways you can have a claim to someone else's wealth. Either he gives it to you by way of a gift, either he sells it to you, either he leases it to you. Yes, there has to be some sort of transaction that happens. You can't just take someone's wealth. So these are ethical principles and ethical conduct. Okay, you have this conduct in your entire life as well, in your day-to-day matters, but specifically in finance and wealth and business, these principles are very important, because what happens if you conduct business like this by way of lying, by way of deception, it's not the case that it's just sinful. It's the case that whatever money you generate now because of that transaction becomes haram. Okay, that wealth of yours is now haram. If you use it for something else, it's haram. Okay, you have wealth that is haram. So it's not just the case that in other cases, for example, you lie, it's a sin, and there's no other effect in terms of on your wealth or on anything else, besides the fact that it's a sin. But in this case, it's a sin, and in addition to being a sin, it makes that transaction and that wealth that you acquire based on these principles, if you violate them, it becomes haram, your wealth. Okay, so these are ethical standards. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions some of these points in the Quran as well, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَا قَوْمِ أَوْفُوا الْمِكْيَالَ وَالْمِيزَانَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that when you're dealing with weights, okay, 100 grams, 200 grams, and you're selling something on weight, okay, then be fair and just in your weight. Don't say that this is 100 grams and you sell him 50 grams. That's deception, that's lying. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that be just and be fair in your weight. Okay, when you weigh something and you sell it, if you say it's 100 grams, then make sure it's 100 grams. Make sure it's not less than 100 grams, because that is lying and that is deceiving. And if you do that intentionally, your wealth becomes haram. Okay, so these are ethical principles that you have to be aware of. And then we've mentioned, I put fiqh principles. Okay, so there's ethical conduct, and then there are principles that the chapter of finance or the chapter of trade in the books of fiqh, they relate to this. If you analyze the entire chapter of fiqh, the chapter of buyu in fiqh, right, you will see these core principles. This is the summary. I've summarized it for you without you having to study this entire chapter in detail. This is the crux of everything. Okay, everything relates to this, and that's why we're going to look at this in some detail, and then we'll look at specific areas. Okay, banking and cryptocurrency and stocks and shares. And the reason why I'm specifically looking at these areas, okay, is so that you can get an idea about how Islam has mentioned about all of these things. It's not the case that Islam doesn't have a framework. Islam has all of these rules. And in addition to that, what we have today in terms of the modern financial system, it's not in line with the Islamic system. And now we have this new industry that's emerging, which is the Islamic finance industry that's emerging. how do they, and what do they do? If they avoid certain things, then how do they create certain products? Okay, so we will look at these points because these are the principles that they use. And if you understand these principles, then you can understand how this whole industry works. And especially for the youngsters, and my biggest aim is to try and inspire the youngsters in particular to try and go into this area so that we can have an alternative system. Okay, it's not a system based on just non-Muslims doing everything. Why can't it be a system where Muslims also have their area inland in Islam? Why can't it be the case? Okay, the first thing is to inspire the youngsters to try and get into this area. So we're going to look at this with regards to the principles, especially the three that I've mentioned here. Okay, because these are very relevant to the specific areas that we're going to discuss. So the first principle that's mentioned is riba. Okay, no riba. The Sharia mentions with regards to usury and interest. Okay, riba, you can translate it as usury, interest broadly. It has specific conditions in Islam. Okay, there are specific conditions that the chapter of Kitab al-Buyu, yes, the chapter of Buyu, business transactions has specific criteria when something will be riba. Okay, we'll discuss riba in detail when we get to banking. Okay, because it relates to banking specifically, we'll discuss it in detail. Risk sharing is that the Sharia wants people to use valid partnerships in order to do business. Islam doesn't want people to just give someone a loan and then he does business with it and then he pays you back and he gives you extra on top. Islam doesn't want you to do that. Islam wants you to share the risk with that person by way of being involved with him in a valid partnership. Okay? And then the asset-backed, what I put with asset-backed is that there has to be real and tangible assets involved. Okay? And not just speculation and uncertainty involved in certain transactions. You have just pure speculation, there's no asset, there's no tangible good. So Islam decides what an asset will be. Okay, not what the financial world tells you is an asset, Islam decides. So we have these three principles. Everything in Islamic finance, everything in Islamic business relates to these core areas. Everything that will be halal and haram is because of a violation of one of these kind of principles. Okay, we see in the context of cryptocurrency and stocks and shares, these kind of concepts play out there. So we'll look at these in some detail. We'll look at first risk sharing and asset backed. Okay, because riba, interest, we look at it in the context of banking. For now, first we look at risk sharing and asset backed. Okay, what does that mean in the context of the Sharia and in the modern world? In practice, what does that mean? Okay, so risk sharing is that what the Sharia is trying to give with this concept is that parties that are involved in business and in dealings, they must involve themselves, if they're in a partnership, if they want to do some sort of business, they must involve themselves in the risk and the reward. It can't be the case that some profit is guaranteed. Remember, if profit is guaranteed, it's not a partnership. It's a loan. Okay, if someone guarantees a profit, it's a loan. Okay, it's interest in the Sharia. It's not considered to be risk sharing. Risk sharing means when people want to do business, they partner with each other. And when they partner with each other, they partner in the risk and they partner in the reward as well. It's not the case that one person takes all the risk and the other person takes all the benefit and then he has to pay that person back. That's like a loan. Islam does not allow that. We look at riba specifically with regards to loans in that context, yes? With banking, I'm just mentioning these particular points now, but with regards to risk sharing, the parties involved, they have to share the risk. And you can never guarantee a profit. If two people do business, they can't say, I take £10,000 and you take £10,000 profit. If you fix that, what if there is no £10,000 profit? Okay? If there's no £10,000 profit, what happens? Okay? You've made a condition that is invalid. Okay? So you have to set percentages. Inshallah, we'll look at risk sharing in specific context. And I mentioned that the losses, they are going to be shared according to the contribution, the investment. Okay? We'll look at that specifically when we look at each of the points. Okay? I've mentioned specific points that the chapter of finance mentions and what the Islamic finance industry nowadays, what it uses. Okay? And then backed by assets. What that means in the Sharia is that all financial transactions, they have to have some sort of tangible asset involved, a real tangible asset, or it has to be a service. You have to provide a service, or you have to have some sort of tangible asset. You can't just sell something that is not considered by Islam to be an asset, to be goods. Okay? And the Sharia will define that. Okay? Not the modern financial world. We will define that, meaning the Sharia. Islam will define that, not the Western world, because the Western world defines certain things as assets. Islam does not accept it as that. Okay, so it has to be backed by an asset. When we get to cryptocurrency, you look at why that's very important in the Sharia. So these are core principles: risk sharing and backed by assets. Everything in Islamic business law and Islamic finance in general relates back to these points. Okay. If there's no asset involved, if there's mere speculation, Islam isn't going to allow that. If there's no proper risk sharing and the transaction looks like it's a loan-based transaction which involves interest, Islam is not going to allow that. Okay, so every single thing relates back to these principles, these core principles. If you understand these core principles, it's very easy for you, without even consulting the ulama, to understand if something is going to be halal or haram. Okay, if you have an idea about risk sharing and something to be backed by assets. So I mentioned a brief summary here with regards to what criteria the Sharia has in the context of risk sharing and being asset backed. Because the Islamic finance industry uses these principles. If you understand these principles, you will understand the Islamic finance industry in general and how they make their products. Okay, and do they violate the Sharia or not? Because there's many questions with regards to Islamic mortgages. Okay, are they halal or they haram? If you understand these points, then you will understand about the financial products that the Islamic finance industry has created. Okay, so I've mentioned them briefly here. We'll look at them in a bit of detail so you have a general idea. We've mentioned Shirkat, which is a traditional partnership. When two people partner with each other to do some business, that's basically Shirkat. The Sharia covers that. There's a concept of Mudarabah as well. Mudarabah means an investor partnership. One person invests, the other person does all the work. Okay? And then there is Ijarah, which means leasing something. Yes, when you lease a car, when you lease a house, rent a house. Okay, Islam has provisions for that. And then there's Murabaha as well, which is called cost plus sale. Okay? When a person buys something and then adds a markup to it and then sells it. We'll look at the details when we get to that specific section. But these are the four general criteria that the Sharia has and what the modern finance industry uses. Okay, these kind of principles. If you understand these principles, you'll understand everything with regards to the Islamic finance industry generally, and then we look at specific context. So if you look at this Shirkat, okay, or partnership, yes, normal traditional partnership. Shirkat refers to a partnership where two or more parties, they combine their capital, yes, their money. They either combine the capital, either combine the labor, or they combine both of them. Okay, one person gives money, the other person does the work, and then they undertake some sort of halal business, and then they share the profits and the losses. Okay, they are involved in both the profit and the loss. Now, with regards to the profit can differ from the capital invested. I'll give you an example so it makes it very easy for you to understand. There's a visual there that makes it easy to understand. That when an individual, so two people, Zayd and Umar, yes, when they do a partnership, let's say Zayd, he wants to invest £40,000. They want to do a business, let's say a catering business. And Zayd invests £40,000 and Umar, he invests £60,000. Okay, so if you look at it combined, that's 60-40, yes, 40% and 60%, yes, in terms of the investment. But they've decided that we want to split the profits 50-50. Okay, they have the right in the Sharia to do that. It doesn't matter what capital you put up, okay, it doesn't matter what capital you put up yourself, you can agree with your partner that we will split the profits in a different way. It doesn't have to be in line with your capital. So even though they've given 60 and 40, technically 60% and 40%. But for the profit, they've decided that they want to do 50-50, the Sharia allows it. Yes? But with regards to the losses, the Sharia says no, the losses won't be 50-50. The losses can only be based on the contribution that they have given. So because Umar gave 60,000 and Zayd gave 40,000, in terms of sharing the losses, if there is a loss, they will only share the loss based on the actual capital contribution. The profits they can share based on their agreed ratio. But losses have to be based on the capital contribution. This is a key criteria of the Sharia. And that's why when you go into the Islamic finance industry in particular, they have to navigate these principles. Okay? That if if they are going to create a product, then it has to make sure it does not violate these principles. So the profit might be shared differently. But remember, the losses have to be shared based on the capital contribution. This is a key criteria of a partnership. So now we see in this day and age, people have companies, they have partners. And we see the way they invest, some person will give 50,000, the other person will give 50,000. They decide, for example, 50-50, okay? When it comes to the losses, then they either decide that there's going to be a different amount of losses, or they decide that one person is going to have more of the loss, the other person is going to have rest of the loss. Okay? You can't change the losses. You can change the profit criteria and agree on it before, but you can't change the loss criteria. This is a key criteria of the Sharia. If you understand this, then you understand how the modern finance industry, especially the Islamic finance industry, how they work and how they have to navigate these points. Because if you violate the Sharia, it's not a valid partnership. Okay, we look at it in the context of Islamic mortgages in particular when we get to that section. I don't know if you want to take a break. So we're discussing the principles specifically related to risk sharing. And we're looking at one of the types of partnership that the Sharia has. Now I understand that this topic can be somewhat dry, let's say. But you have to understand this principle because this area, like I mentioned at the very start, it's a very technical and intricate area generally. And it has a lot of principles. Even the ulama themselves, when they are studying, yes, they struggle with it at the start. Yes, the chapter of business transactions has a lot of technicalities. So I've tried to summarize them in the best way that I can. You just have to try and understand these points. Inshallah, when we get to the next section on specific areas, you'll see how all of it fits together with regards to what we look at, banking and stocks and shares, cryptocurrency, and all other matters related to that. So we just briefly go through this section. It's important to understand this. That's the only way we're going to be able to understand how it relates to other areas, and more specifically, Islamic banking in particular, which is an up-and-coming industry, especially in the UK. So we've already discussed about Shirka, and I discussed about the fact that it's a valid partnership in the Sharia. It's when two people partner with each other to do something, okay? A trade, business, or even a product. People can partner to buy a house. One person can give 50%, another person can give 50%, okay? But they have to fulfill these conditions of the Sharia, which is if they are going to set a profit ratio, they have to set in advance, and it has to be based on percentage. And it doesn't have to be in line with the capital contribution. But the losses have to be in line with the capital contribution. If there is a loss, it has to be in line with how much each person invested, not based on their profit ratio. These are key criteria. So you have to understand that with regards to this, because many people also do this type of partnership where they buy a house together. Yes, as an investment property, for example, they buy a house with someone else. Okay, and they have 50-50. When it's 50-50, it's not usually much of an issue. But when there is a difference, when one person contributes something else, another person contributes something else, then there becomes a bit of an issue when it comes to the losses. When there are losses, it has to be shared based on what the contribution was. Okay, not based on the profit ratio. This is a very key criteria. Keep that in your mind. The next principle that we have, or the next category that we have that discusses about risk sharing, is called Mudarabah. Okay, this is a profit-sharing partnership where one party provides the capital. Okay, one party provides the capital, and the other party provides the expertise and the effort. Meaning, one person provides just the money and the investment, and the other person, he provides his time and his effort. And the reason why something like this is permitted in the Sharia is because there's always the case where one person has loads of money, but he doesn't have any business sense. He doesn't know how to do business. There's another person who has no money, but he knows how to do business and trade. Okay, so the Sharia allows these two people to get together, one person to give the money, and the other person gives his time. They are both sharing in the risk and the reward. But the difference here with Mudarabah and what we mentioned, Shirka, the difference is the investor is the only one who gives money. Only one person gives the money. In a Shirka, both of the parties give money. In Mudarabah, only one person gives the money, but the other person, he's giving his time. So in terms of the profits, they are going to be agreed based on the ratio that they want to agree. Yes, they can decide 30%, 70%, whatever the profit ratio they want to decide, they can decide. The Sharia allows them this leeway to decide the profit percentage. But with regards to the losses in this case are only going to be on the person who is the investor. because he's the one giving his capital contribution. The risk of the person who does the work is that he will lose his time. If there is a loss, he will lose his time and he won't make any money. That's the risk that he takes. The risk that the investor takes is with his money. So in this case, there is also risk sharing, but instead of it being purely financial risk sharing, there is the concept that one person is risking his time and the other person is risking his capital. The Sharia requires this in this kind of partnership. Now in this kind of partnership, there are specific rules. In Shirkat as well, there are specific rules. You have to follow them. I've not mentioned all of them because if you mention them, they'll get very lengthy. You have to, if you're going to go down this route, then you have to learn this area. Okay, if you're going to do this kind of business model, for example, you have to then learn the area, either with the ulama, or you have to read the books that have these kind of points in them. They have specific conditions and specific rules. So we have this concept. And like I said at the start, the reason why I'm mentioning these points is so you have an understanding that the Sharia has already addressed everything. Okay, it's just a way of how do we bring it into the modern context. That's very important. Okay, so I put a visual here for you in an example for Mudarabah. Ahmad and Bilal, they want to do a business together, and Ahmad, he's the one who's the investor, right? He's the one who provides the capital. And Bilal is the one who's going to do all the work. He's going to do the business. Ahmad is just going to provide the capital. They decide they want to do 70% split, 70-30 profit. Okay, Ahmad will get 70, Bilal will get 30. Okay, they can decide that. The Sharia gives them that leeway to decide that. Okay, but in terms of the losses, Ahmad will have 100% of the financial losses. Okay, and Bilal, he will have, when there's a loss in the business, then he will just lose his time and effort and he won't make any money. That's the difference with this and Shirka. In Shirka, both parties are risking their capital. In this partnership, one person risks his capital and the other person risks his time and his effort in doing the business, and he won't get anything in return when there is a loss in the business. Okay, so there's a distinction between the two. This is very important when we look at Islamic banking and how they have their products. They have savings accounts. And when they have savings accounts, they base it on this concept of Mudarabah. So if you understand what Mudarabah is, you will understand how the Islamic banks, for example, have savings accounts that are based on this kind of principle, instead of it being based on interest. Okay, so they use this concept. We'll look at it in more detail when we get to banking, inshallah. The next section is Ijarah, which is leasing. Okay, when someone leases something from somebody else, rents something, okay, either you can rent an asset or an item or an appliance or a product, you can rent that, or you can rent someone's time in terms of a service. Okay, and it has to have a fixed period and it has to have a fixed rental amount. You have to agree these points. It has to be fixed in the Sharia. But you still retain ownership. When a person rents out his house, he doesn't give you ownership of the house. He lets you benefit from the house. This is considered leasing in Islam. The other criteria that we have in Islam is selling, when someone gives you something and you exchange money for it. In this case, he's giving you the benefit, okay, the use of that property, the use of that item, or you're using his time and you are paying for his time. For example, a service, when an accountant prepares your accounts for you, for example, he is giving you his time and his service. He could charge for that service and time. That's also Ijarah. So there's two categories for Ijarah. One is when you rent an actual product or a property, and the other is when you rent someone's time or someone's effort. This is what we call services and what we call products or assets. Okay, so you can rent and lease. The Sharia has provisions for that. But it has specific conditions. You have to make sure that everything is fixed. The rental period is fixed. The specific amount is fixed. So that there is no argument between the parties with regards to what the rent will be, how long the rent will be for, what the duration will be. Okay, there's no argument between the people, between two parties like that. So it covers everything from employment to services, to leasing products, to leasing cars, to leasing properties. Everything is covered by this concept in the Sharia, Ijarah. Yes, renting. So even your employment falls under this category of Ijarah. Okay, when your employer, he rents your time, okay, and he pays you for it. This also falls into this category. There's specific rules for that as well. You might think that there's no rules in the Sharia for this. If you look at the books of fiqh and you look at Ijarah, there's a specific section on employment. When you employ someone, how you have to give him money, what time duration, what holidays you have to give him. All of this is discussed, okay, in the books of fiqh. The Sharia has discussed everything. It exists, and the ulama use this to bring it into the modern context. So we have Ijarah, and then we have Murabaha. It's different to Mudarabah, yes? Don't get them confused. Mudarabah is a type of partnership. Murabaha is a slightly different concept. It's a cost plus sale contract. Okay? This is where a seller, he buys an item and then he resells it to the client or the customer that he has at a disclosed profit. A normal business transaction, it's simply, I want to sell you this water bottle. I say to you, it's £1, you buy it. I don't tell you how much profit I'm making. I don't tell you what the cost of the product was. I don't tell you any of that. That's a normal business transaction. I can sell you this bottle for £1. You don't need to know how much profit I'm making. You don't need to know what my cost was. And I don't need to declare that to you in the Sharia. Yes, you don't need to declare that. You're simply buying it because you need the water, and I'm selling it to you because there is a need. Okay, supply and demand. The Sharia allows that. That's a business transaction. This is a specific type of contract. Okay, in Murabaha, a person buys an item and then he tells the customer, I bought it for this much. These are all the direct costs related to it, and this is my profit margin on top of it. Okay, and you need to pay me this total figure. For example, if a person wants to buy a house, as an example, the house costs £150,000, as an example, and you don't have the money, but someone else has the money. You ask this person, you can ask him for a loan. Now it's very unlikely that anyone's going to give you a loan, £150,000, without getting any benefit from it. And the Sharia does not allow you to benefit by way of interest by giving a loan and then taking an extra amount. The Sharia does not allow that for you. Okay? But if you sell something, the Sharia allows that. If you make a business transaction, the Sharia allows that. So this contract specifically, mentioned in the books of fiqh, it's not made up by the ulama or anything in terms of modern scholarship. It's not like that. It's from the classical fiqh books. Yes? Murabaha, when a person does not have the money to buy the house, he approaches someone who does have the money. So that person says, okay, I will buy this property. I will buy this property for £150,000 and then I will sell it to you, okay, for £200,000, as an example. I will sell it to you and then you can pay me this money in installments. Okay, you can pay this money over the years, total of £200,000, even though it's only £150,000, the total cost of the property. Now, why is that allowed in the Sharia? Why is that not loan? Because there's a sale involved. Okay, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, when the rulings of riba, interest were revealed, when Allah prohibited it, the kuffar said, what's the difference? What's the difference between business and what's the difference between interest? They're both making profit. Why? What is the difference between the two? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the answer. وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْءَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted business transactions because it's a trading of goods and services. Whereas riba is a person giving money and then he's provided nothing besides money. And he wants to take a fee for providing that money. Islam does not allow him to do that. Because there's a difference between the two. In this case, in Murabaha, because you're not giving a loan, you are taking the risk as well. By buying that property, you're also taking the risk. So in Murabaha, it's required that you take a risk. Meaning you buy the property first and then you can sell it, because now it's a business transaction, it's a sale. So a lot of the banks, Islamic banks, especially in Muslim countries, in Malaysia, Pakistan and other countries where this industry is very popular, they use this kind of method, Murabaha, where the bank will buy the property and then the bank will sell you that property. It's the same as you buying the property directly from the seller. The difference is you're buying it this time from the bank who has purchased it, who has taken the risk on themselves, yes, with regards to buying it, and then they charge you more when they sell it, because in Islam you're allowed to charge for a business transaction, but you can't charge more for a loan. So if I give you a more simple example, this water bottle, okay, if I sell it to you for £100 or £1, the Sharia allows me to do that. As long as you're willing to pay for it and I'm not deceiving you, and I've told you that this is a water bottle, and you know, I can sell it to you for £100, or I can sell it to you for £1. You can pay whatever you want. In the same way with this Murabaha transaction, first one person buys it, and then he sells it to someone else for a higher price. So it's a sale, and it's not a loan. So this kind of concept exists. So we can use these kind of models to make a system where we don't deal with what Islam has prohibited, and instead we make a financing model that the Sharia allows. Okay, where a lot of the whole industry that we have relies on these kind of concepts. Yes, they use these from the classical text to come up with a solution. Okay, that we avoid anything that's haram. So this is a Murabaha. So these are the criteria for risk sharing. We mentioned 4 particular points with regards to that, and asset backed as well included within that. So we mentioned these particular points. So now we're going to discuss specific areas. Perhaps this is probably the most interesting area for most people. and it's probably when you're going to be the most alert, okay? Because we're going to now the actual topics everyone wants to discuss and everyone wants to know about. Yes? So, banking, okay? In banking, the first area that we're going to discuss is riba, usury, interest, okay? And it's a very hot topic. It's a question that you receive every single time, and most of the questions are related to banking to some extent, okay? So we're going to look at this in some detail because it's very important. Riba, the word riba, okay, we can translate it loosely as usury or interest. Okay, you can translate it like that, even though it's not always the case. Okay, because there are specific conditions that the Sharia has set for when riba will apply. It's not the case what the world says is riba, the Sharia decides. Okay, so it has two types. There are two types of riba. Okay, interest. We're not going to discuss the other type. That's not relevant to us mostly. Okay, we're going to discuss the most common type that we have in this day and age. Okay, and the Sharia sets specific conditions for when something will be riba. Okay, that's very important to understand. If the modern financial world is saying this is interest, it doesn't mean it's always interest because they have said so. If the conditions of the Sharia do not apply, then it won't be interest. Okay, so the Sharia has these conditions. You have to understand those conditions to understand what riba is. Okay, so the four schools, they differ on the exact conditions of when a riba will apply, what is the reasoning behind the prohibition of riba. They have a difference of opinion on this. But the general consensus is that riba is haram. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran that it's haram, it's forbidden, it's prohibited. And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned with regards to it being prohibited, by consensus it's haram. The only difference is, when does it apply? Okay? Does it apply in this case or not in this case? The conditions are differed upon by the four schools. Okay? But in terms of the general prohibition, the Sharia says riba is haram. Okay? So we look at some of these points with regards to conditions, especially in our time. So the reason why riba is prohibited, the rationale behind it, is because it's an unjust and predatory financial practice. Okay, it preys on those who are desperate. People who don't have money, it preys on them. If you look at payday loans and other loans that exist, credit cards as well, if you look at the interest rate on these loans, okay, it's very high. And the people who use those credit cards and loans are people who are in a desperate situation. And what the company does is they bank on their desperation, and they know that they're not going to pay back this money in time, and we'll be able to charge them double, triple, quadruple, yes, and then put them in this cycle of interest and keep them in debt forever, okay, and then seize their assets. This is a predatory practice. The Sharia does not allow predatory practices. Remember when I mentioned at the start that all of the principles of the Sharia relate to justice and fairness. Islam wants to create that just and fair society. So riba is prohibited because it's an unjust and predatory financial practice. Inshallah, I'll go through it quickly so we can address the questions as well before Maghrib. The most common type of riba is what is known as riba al-qard or riba al-nas'iyya. Okay, basically what we understand as credit, okay, that is what this type of riba relates to, credit. When you give someone money, okay, I mentioned the definition there, when a surplus is added to a loan. Okay, you give someone money and you add a surplus to it and you make it a condition and you say you have to give me this much on top back, this excess that you are charging on top of the loan, this is riba, this is interest, this is haram, okay, in the Sharia. So the example is mentioned there. If you lend someone £100 and you say to him, you have to give me £150 back, this £50 that you have charged extra, this is riba, it's haram, it's not in exchange for anything. You didn't sell him a product, you gave him a loan. So this excess in the Sharia is haram. Okay, this is what riba is. Okay, when there's a loan involved and there's any excess on top of the principal amount of the loan, it becomes riba. Okay, and it's haram in the Sharia. So the difference between riba and profit, even though the word riba means excess and profit is also excess, but the difference, I already discussed it briefly. Yes, riba is surplus from a loan. When you give a loan and you charge extra amount on top of it, okay, this is riba. This is haram. A profit is when you sell something and there's actual good involved. Remember tangible assets that I mentioned? You actually sold an asset or you gave your service and then you made a profit. The Sharia allows that. It allows you to trade goods, it allows you to trade services, but it does not allow you to give a loan and make an excess. Okay, that's the difference. Okay, profit is allowed, but riba or interest is not allowed. It's haram in Islam. Okay, prohibited. Now we're going to discuss this topic. Okay, probably the most hot topic with regards to banking and finance specifically. So, does riba apply with non-Muslims? Okay, we live in a non-Muslim country. Does it apply here in this country? Okay, so I've mentioned the difference in terms of the classical position. So classical position, there's a difference of opinion among the fuqaha, among the jurists. The three Imams, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Imam Abu Yusuf, who is a Hanafi. His position is that riba applies in all cases, meaning interest applies in every single case, whether you're doing it with a non-Muslim or whether you're doing it with a Muslim, it applies in all cases. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, they, both Hanafi, they take the view that riba, meaning interest, does not apply when you deal with a non-Muslim. Okay, this is a classical position of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, that when you're dealing with a non-Muslim, riba does not apply. Remember when I mentioned about the conditions, that there has to be certain conditions that apply for riba to apply? The other Imams, they say, this is not a condition for us. That it has to be with a Muslim or non-Muslim. It's for anyone. It's impermissible. But Imam Abu Hanifa has a classical position that riba does not apply when it's with a non-Muslim. Okay? And in non-Muslim lands. It does not apply with them. Now this view is based on the fact that the condition for riba does not exist, which is what Imam Abu Hanifa's condition. I'm simplifying it, but I don't want to go into too much detail with regards to it, because a lot of technicalities involved. But the main criteria being that if it's a non-Muslim party and it's a Muslim, then if there is an excess involved in the loan, then it's not riba. Okay? It's not interest. Okay? What does that mean in terms of what the mainstream view is of the Ahlul Sunnah scholars? The majority of the Indian Sunni scholars of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and many of the Syrian Hanafi scholars as well. Okay, many of the Syrian Hanafi scholars have this position as well. They take the position that based on this classical view of Imam Abu Hanifa, okay, if you take interest from a non-Muslim, it's permissible because it's not riba. Remember, it's not riba because it's a non-Muslim. It's not riba. It's not the case that they are saying it's halal to take riba. That's not the case. It's not halal ever to take riba. They are saying that it's not riba to begin with because the condition of riba did not apply. The condition is it has to be with a Muslim, not a non-Muslim. So they say if you take interest, then it's permissible. Okay, because it's not riba to begin with. Because with a non-Muslim, the other Imams will say no, it's not permissible. With regards to giving interest, okay, if you give it to a non-Muslim and you're giving him an excess on top, you get a loan, for example, a mortgage, and you pay him extra, this is not permissible. And the reason is, it's not because it's a riba. Many of the scholars, the majority of them, they don't take this view. They take the view that it's still not riba, because it's with a non-Muslim, but it's impermissible because you're giving him extra and you're putting yourself at loss. Okay? But then they have this nuanced position, that as long as you benefit from it more than what you pay to them, then it would be permissible. This is a nuanced position of the Hanafi scholars of India in particular. They take this position. Okay, that if you take a mortgage from a bank, for example, you can take the mortgage, it wouldn't be interest, okay, because of the fact that it's with a non-Muslim and it's not interest to begin with. And when you take this mortgage and you make a financial benefit more than what you're going to pay them in interest, they consider that to be permissible because it's not riba. Remember that. We're not saying here that riba is allowed. Many people object and they say the Hanafi school is saying riba is permissible, the Quran says riba is haram. We're not saying riba is allowed. We're saying it's not riba to begin with. Yes, because the conditions have not applied. Okay, so this is the mainstream view of the Sunni scholars. Now what does this mean in practice? This means that banking interest, if the banks are non-Muslim, because they are non-Muslim owned, then the interest that they give you is not riba and it can be taken, according to the classical position of the Sunni scholars from India. With regards to mortgages, they mentioned that banks are non-Muslim owned entities, and therefore it's a non-Muslim land. If you take a mortgage from them and you can make more there's a more financial benefit for you, then it's permissible because it's not riba and there's a benefit for you. This is the classical position, yes, in this context of what the Sunni scholars of India say. The question is, are banks non-Muslim? Okay, we have said that it's with a non-Muslim. The question is, are banks non-Muslim? Okay, so if you analyze this, then you see that the reality is not what it appears. Okay, most of the large banks that we have, they are public companies. Okay, they have public shareholders. Anyone can invest in these banks. Can be a Muslim, can be a non-Muslim. Anyone can invest in these banks. Okay, now if there is a single shareholder that's a Muslim, then this criteria of dealing with Muslim, non-Muslim doesn't exist. Now you're dealing with a Muslim as well. Because if there is a shareholder, then he's a part owner. And being involved with a part owner is also impermissible, okay, in the Sharia. So we have to analyze this as well. Yeah, this is something that has been missed in the research, and I have analyzed this, and I'm presenting this point, okay, that there is a very big doubt, a very big ihtimal and shubha that exists with regards to banks. It's not the case that they're just purely non-Muslim entities. And I've put a case study here for you with regards to Barclays. Okay, Barclays is a UK bank. Okay, it's one of the largest. Look at the amount of shares that they have. Okay, and if we analyze the shares and we look at the shareholders, okay, in terms of institutional shareholders, we have Qatar, which is the investment authority of Qatar. They've invested in Barclays. Okay, they invested almost 3%. At one point it was 6.5%, but they divested their shares, and now they have almost 3% ownership in Barclays. Okay, so if they are 3% part owner in Barclays, then if we deal with Barclays in this manner and we say they are non-Muslim, okay, how does that work? Okay, we can't say with 100% certainty they're non-Muslim because they have Muslim shareholders. Now I've discussed this with many of the senior scholars, and some of them take the view that it still doesn't matter because it's a non-Muslim land, and they still consider this to the original ruling to exist. And my simple point is, it creates a very big doubt. Okay, besides the fact that you can discuss about whether practically it's true, are the shareholders considered real owners, this, that, the other, you can have all these discussions if you want. My point is the fact that they exist and they are part owners, then this concept of it not applying with Muslims, okay, it brings a very big doubt, a very big question mark. And when Riba is involved, because it's such a big sin, okay, and the verses that were recited at the very beginning, it mentioned about declaring war with Allah and His Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, when it's such a big sin, then what do we do? When there's a big doubt like this, that now Muslim shareholders are involved, what do we do? Okay, do we continue with this position that it's allowed to carry on taking interest and it's allowed to carry on dealing with interest? Okay, when it comes to that, are we going to just keep going with that position, or are we going to start saying that there is some issue now with banks? Okay, so I've mentioned this case study here just to give you an idea that it's not as black and white as it originally was. There are a lot of issues and questions with regards to this. So what do we do? Okay, what do we do with regards to this particular point? The best thing to do is to adopt an Ihtayat based approach, which is a cautious based approach, to not deal with interest in any way. The ulama that mention about interest, they have a caveat as well. They say it's better not to. Even though they say that it's non-Muslim and it might be permissible, they still have a caveat saying it's better not to. Okay? Because of the fact that when you take interest, if it is interest, let's say, in reality, when you take it in your possession, that money is haram. When you use it for something else, it's haram. Okay, so why make your wealth impure for the small amount that the bank gives you? Why not keep away from it completely and to keep your wealth pure, even if there's a difference of opinion among the scholars? The best approach is, and this is the mindset that I want to create in people, the best approach is to not deal with it, okay, to not be involved in anything interest related. And I mentioned that at the end with regards to what the approach should be and the mindset should be. The best approach is, because we have this big question mark about banks now, and whether they are actually non-Muslim or whether they are Muslim owned as well, and what that means in practice, it's better to avoid interest in its entirety. If you're receiving it, it's better not to take it. It's better to give it in charity, to give it away. Many of the ulama that mention this position of permissibility, they're all right. It's better not to keep it. It's better to give it away. Yes, so that you are on the safe side. It's better in all of these things to be on the safe side. With regards to mortgages as well, the ulama have their position, and we'll discuss that in the context of certain questions of what do we do with regards to mortgages. Are we allowed more than one? Is there a necessity-based argument? Is it permissible entirely? We'll discuss that in the context of the questions that we have. Okay, so I've mentioned briefly about Islamic banking. Okay, the principles that they use are what we've already discussed. Okay, partnerships, Mudarabah type partnerships, Ijarah, which is leasing, and Murabaha, which is the cost plus model that I mentioned. They use all of these ideas to come up with an alternative system which is not based on loans, it's based on partnerships. Okay, the Sharia says you have to share the risk. So they have come up with an alternative, and this is why we also need to get into this industry so that we can come up with the alternatives. Instead of staying with the traditional and conventional system, why don't we make our own system as well using these principles? The Sharia has them. It's not the case that it doesn't exist. Okay, so the Islamic banks use this. I'm going to mention a specific example in the context of mortgages. Okay, Islamic banks nowadays that we see now, not all of them do everything by the book. Okay, some of them have certain areas that are not very, you can say, above board. Okay, and they have some suspicious activity involved. Okay, but not all of them are like that. Okay, we can't paint all of them with the same brush. Okay, they have this concept called musharaka. Okay, and this is a combination of what we've discussed already: Shirkat, which is a partnership, and Ijarah, which is renting and leasing. Okay, they've come up with this system. So people ask, what is an Islamic mortgage? How does it work? This is how it works. Okay, it's musharaka. It's called musharaka. It's a partnership between you and the bank. So when you get a traditional mortgage, the bank just gives you a loan and says buy the house and pays this much on top of the loan every month. That's riba, that's interest, because of the fact that they are charging on top of a loan. What Islamic bank does, the principle of the Sharia, remember, risk sharing. What they do, they partner with you. So they say, we'll buy the house with you. 80% the bank will give, 20% you give. Okay? They purchase the property together, and then the buyer, when you've purchased it, you gradually buy the bank's share off them by paying them monthly. Okay? And then you also pay rent to the bank. Because there's a principle in the Sharia that when two people own something, and the one person uses it, then the other person has the right to charge him a rent for using his part. Okay, when you buy it with the Islamic bank, for example, they charge 80% and you are paying 20%. You own 80, they own 80%, you own 20%. Okay, and then every month you pay them a rent for the 80% of their share. Okay, and you also buy out their share monthly as well. Okay, this is what the system that they use. Okay, Shirka, which is one principle of Islam that exists, partnerships, and then they use Ijarah as well, which is leasing, and they combine the two, and then they come up with this system. So you avoid this interest-based system, and instead you come up with a risk-sharing system, where the bank is also taking the risk. Yes, because the bank is now 80% owner of this, it's also taking the risk. Okay, so when it's like that, it becomes permissible. Okay, but it's not the case that every single type of these transactions are permissible. I can't say that. Okay, I can't say every single type of them is, every single bank that does this is permissible. They might have certain things that make the transaction invalid. Okay, but you have to analyze what they are doing. And inshallah, the whole point of this, and with the finance think tank that I have and I will be doing inshallah, is to try and analyze these things. Yes, to analyze the modern products, and then to analyze whether they are actually Sharia compliant or whether they are inconsistent with the principles of the Sharia. So we have this concept that the Islamic banks use. Okay? Musharaka, I mentioned that, yes, banking and shirka, these are the concepts that Islamic banks use, and these are alternatives that the Islamic banks have. Okay, I'm not going to discuss more of the categories that Islamic banks have with regards to savings accounts and such. We don't want to get into too much detail with regards to that. Maybe some other time we can discuss those kind of concepts, or maybe in the answers to the questions, some questions are related to that, we can answer those points. I'm going to briefly go through this just because of the time. Cryptocurrency, the ruling is there at the bottom that it's prohibited to invest in cryptocurrency. Remember the principles that I mentioned at the very start. Okay, the Islamic principles. Asset backed. Okay, it has to be an asset, what the Sharia considers to be an asset. Okay, cryptocurrency does not have a tangible existence. Okay, it's intangible. And because it's intangible, okay, the Sharia is not going to permit you to invest in that. Okay, because an asset in the Sharia requires tangibility, and cryptocurrency does not have tangibility. Now you might object that what about money? Money is digital in this day and age. They say that only 3% of money is in circulation in terms of actual currency and coins. The rest of it is just digital numbers in the bank. I mentioned that already at the start. That is based on necessity. Without it, we can't live life. Without cryptocurrency, we can't live life. Okay, cryptocurrency has not become the center of our life. If it ever becomes that case, then there is the criteria of necessity, and it will be allowed based on necessity, because without it, we can't do anything. But at this moment in time, cryptocurrency has no tangible existence. Okay, it's purely speculative. The entire market is purely just about speculating on the price. When the Sharia does not consider it to be an asset, it's not permissible to invest in it. Okay, so it has to be avoided in its entirety, because it's purely, merely just speculating on price, and the Sharia does not attach the concept of asset to it. Okay, it's not an asset in the Sharia. Okay, this is a general view of almost all of the scholars. That it does not fit the criteria within the Sharia of an asset. It's just purely speculative, and there's also scams. You see NFTs and all of these things that people do. There's a lot of scams involved. Okay, the whole industry is just based on scam. It's not based on anything to do with real principles of the Sharia. So this has to be avoided entirely. Cryptocurrency has to be avoided entirely. This is generally the majority view across the board. And then we have stocks and shares. Okay, I've mentioned the position here with regards to stocks and shares. What most of the mainstream people mention today are these conditions. Okay, they've come up with conditions. The company's core business must be halal, okay, and not prohibited. Okay, the total interest-based debt that the company has to be less than 33%. And then they mentioned this criteria as well, that the haram sources the business cannot exceed more than 5%. But just look at this criteria, and I mentioned it here. This criteria is arbitrary. Okay, it doesn't come from some kind of, it doesn't come from fiqh rules. Okay, it's just made up. Okay, by the independent judgment of certain scholars. This criteria does not exist in the classical text. Okay, why is it the case that 33% was a number that they came up with? Okay, why is it not 40%? Why is it not 35%? Okay, if the Sharia mentioned it, it's a different story. But why is it 33%? If someone does it and it's 34%, it becomes impermissible magically. Okay, these criteria don't exist within the principles of the Sharia. Okay, what many people have done with regards to halal stock screening, it doesn't exist. Okay, sadly, this is the mainstream that we have in this day and age. And if we analyze it, it's just getting people involved in businesses that are not permissible, okay, or that have many haram things within them, okay? So for example, if a person invests in a company and the company's main core business is halal, but the company has a bank account where they're making billions and billions in interest, for example, and they also have debt-based securities where they are paying billions and billions in interest also. When you invest in that company, you are also involved in all of that, yes? You are also involved in all of that. And then when there are haram aspects to that business, when they're doing haram things and haram trade, okay, you are also involved in that. So how can it be permissible to be involved in a business like that? When we ask these people who allow this, when we say to them, can I start a business with someone else, and I start a property business, and we get property on loan from a bank, on an interest-based loan, and then we make sure it doesn't exceed 33% of our assets, okay? We just make sure we don't do that. Is this business allowed? They say, no, it's not allowed, because you're taking interest from bank. You ask them that, is it allowed to put your money, the business money, in a bank account that bears interest? They say, no, it's not allowed, it's not permissible. Okay? So when it's in this context, when you ask them a question about this, it's not allowed. When it's in the context of public companies, why does it magically become allowed? Okay, so these criteria don't exist. I mentioned the position of our scholars. The scholars of the Ahlus Sunnah, they do not accept these criteria. They unanimously prohibit this kind of investment because if you invest in any type of stock in these companies, it's impossible to avoid the riba, it's impossible to avoid the haram that's involved in these companies. How are you supposed to avoid all of that? When they're involved in all of that, how are you supposed to avoid all of that when you're investing in these companies? So it becomes impermissible to invest in these companies. So stocks and shares, the general consensus of our scholars, of the Ahlus Sunnah scholars, is that of impermissibility. They have said it's outright impermissible. Other scholars have said that you can screen the stocks based on the criteria that I mentioned, but that criteria, like I said, our scholars do not agree with it. So at this moment in time, as it stands, stocks and shares and investing in this is not permissible according to our ulama. And I've mentioned this to you about the conflicting views that the people who allow it, the conflicting views that they have. Okay, that on the one hand, they won't allow people to do it personally, but they allow you to do it when it's with a large corporation. Why is there a difference in ruling? Okay, the ruling should be the same. So I mentioned that particular point there, and you can see in terms of this visual, it's a public company, they have interest-based debt, and then they have halal income, they have haram income. You invest in that, you're involved in all of that. How do you avoid all of that? Now some people say, at the end of the year, you give 5% in sadaqah to purify your wealth. Why 5%? Okay, with the Sharia, on what basis is it 5%? What if the company made 50% from haram? Why is it just a 5% figure? Why is it 33% interest to asset ratio? Why is it 33%? Okay, why can't it be less? Why can't it be more? What is the basis of that? Okay, so you can take up to 33% of interest, but you can't take more than that. Okay, these criteria, like I said, are arbitrary. Our ulama have said that if we can't avoid all of these things, it's better to just completely avoid it and not be involved in it. Okay, so I'm going to briefly mention the new approach, or this framework that I have, this mindset. You can see I'm going to go through it quickly. I don't think there's that much time left, and we have some questions to address as well. Okay, we can do the questions after Maghrib, inshallah, if everyone is okay with that. We'll just go through this. There's not that much left anyway. With regards to the framework that I've mentioned here, okay, I mentioned certain points. Okay, I mentioned different things: cryptocurrency, stocks, interest, mortgage, this, that, the other. Okay, I mentioned this framework. It's called Ihtayat framework. It means cautious. Remember what I mentioned at the start? لا بأس بالغنى لمن اتقى. There is no issue with those who have taqwa to gain wealth. You need to build taqwa. To build taqwa, you need to take this approach. Okay, this Ihtiyat approach, which is you avoid anything that is interest related. It doesn't matter what the position is, you avoid it. Out of Ihtiyat. Okay, out of caution, you avoid it completely. You don't deal with it, you don't get involved in it. Okay, you don't take the money that comes in your bank account with regards to interest, you completely avoid it. This is the most cautious approach that you can take in this day and age. Because of the difference of opinions among the scholars and all of the doubts that are involved, what do? It's better to take this approach that you completely avoid it. Okay? So you take a cautious approach with investing your money. Because you don't want it to be the case that if interest comes in your bank and then you invest it, that money you take and then you invest into something else. Now because it was haram to begin with, now your investments have become haram. It's better to just avoid it. It's not like the bank gives that much money anyway. Okay, if you look at the interest, right now it has increased, but for many years, the interest was very poor. Okay, what they give in your bank account, yes? A few £100 at the end of the year. Okay, if that's the case. For a few £100, you're willing to risk this major sin. Why? Okay, why go down that route? It's better to just have ihtiyat, completely avoid it. If it's coming into your account, they're giving it to you because you have a savings account, for example, giving sadaqah without the intention of reward. Giving sadaqah, give it away. Okay? That way you save yourself from having haram wealth. Don't take a liberal approach with your wealth. Don't take the approach, I'm just going to do whatever, it doesn't matter. Don't take that approach. Okay, like I mentioned, remember the Rizq Principle. Okay? Your provision is already decreed, whatever you're going to get, it's written for you. It's your choice whether you want to acquire it through halal and haram. Don't make it so that what was going to come to you, okay, becomes haram because you chose that path. Okay? So then people ask, what are the halal investments? I mentioned them here for you briefly. I can't go into too much details with regards to each of them because there are specific details for each of them. But what are the halal investments? If we've said avoid all of this other stuff, then there must be something that is halal. So we have them. These are the ones that are not controversial. Okay, I've included only those that are not controversial. Okay, among the ulama. Okay, we have real estate, which is property, because that's an actual tangible real asset. Okay, and it's permissible according to everyone. Okay, nobody denies that real estate is permissible. You can buy real estate, you can sell real estate, you can rent real estate, all permissible. Okay, there's gold, silver, and commodities. Gold and silver, okay, or actual tangible assets. I'm not talking about trading gold and silver online. Okay, there's specific conditions with regards to gold and silver. Okay, I'm talking about actually buying the physical gold, keeping it, okay, and then the value increasing, and then you can sell it later on and you can make more money from the gold. I'm talking about that. Yes, I'm not talking about the investing, what people do online, the speculative. I'm talking about the actual gold and silver, the actual metal. Okay, and then there's commodities and investment in commodities, okay, trading certain type of commodities. Because they are tangible assets, Islam allows you to trade them. But like I said again, the online trading, which is based on speculation, no. But there are other ways that you can invest in commodities that are permissible because they are tangible assets. Okay, then another permissible halal investment, business. Okay, you can do a business, a service, you can provide a service, you can provide a product. It's allowed in Islam. Okay, pooled investments. If you yourself don't want to do business, remember we mentioned those criteria. If you don't want to do it yourself, you can tell someone else to do it and have a partnership. Okay, the Sharia allows that. If you don't have enough money to buy your own house, you don't want to get a loan, for example, and you have family and brothers, for example, you can pool your money and then you can buy the property in partnership. Okay, the Sharia allows these kind of criteria. If you want to make quick money, I'm sorry to tell you, but there's no way in the Sharia like that. Yes, quick money most of the times is not permissible. It is always based on different approaches which are not halal in Islam. Yes, so quick money doesn't exist. These are the approaches that you have. Okay, and then the last one that I mentioned is Islamic alternatives, which are the new industry that is forming in this country. We have different type of investment trusts that are based on real estate, for example. Okay, these things are emerging now. So now look into these kind of things, and the youngsters try to get into these kind of things. Okay, where you're doing it from an Islamic perspective instead of going down the route that let's just do, the most haram way possible. Nowadays, that's what the youngsters do. The most haram way possible. Okay, instead of trying to find what does Islam say, maybe I try this way. Okay, try that way. Because these are halal investments that I mentioned briefly. Build alternatives is a mindset I want to create among the Sunnis specifically, because we are not in this area at all. We don't exist in this area. Okay, Sunnis need to get into this area. Okay, you need to set up your own companies and systems, okay, that provides an alternative finance system based on these Islamic principles that we discussed today. Okay, and the scholars, what they need to do, they need to provide the practical guidance. Okay, with regards to how something like this can happen. The people cannot do any of these things unless the scholars provide the guidance. Okay, so that is also required. I provided practical examples of what can exist in terms of an Islamic approach to alternative investing. Okay, real estate funds, like I mentioned, is a tangible asset. The Sharia allows it, and nobody has a difference of opinion on it. Okay, nobody has a difference of opinion on real estate, on property. Everyone allows it, everyone allows renting it, everyone allows selling it. Okay, so a person, a Muslim, can create a company. There's a real estate investment fund, okay, where Muslims and others can invest in small portions, okay, and then they own portions of property, and then they also receive that portion of the rent. And then the loss criteria that we mentioned with regards to Shirkat, that this much loss has to be attributed to this much capital. All of those criteria, you can include them and create a fund. Okay, practical examples. Then we have business funds. Okay, you can create like a venture capital fund. Okay, where there's halal businesses that operate and they provide halal services, halal products, and then there's a business that invests in these products, and then the profit that is generated is shared among the investors, okay, using those principles that I've mentioned. And then there's halal financing that Muslims can get into. Okay, we have these mortgages and this, that, the other. We can get into this alternative where Muslims are providing halal financing, meaning you're using these principles to provide people housing. Instead of people having to use conventional mortgages, you can use the Islamic principles to provide halal financing using the Murabaha that we mentioned, the Musharaka that we mentioned, these kind of concepts, okay, in terms of an Islamic perspective. You can set these up. And once we set these up, we can have an alternative system, inshallah. So this is a mindset I want to build. Don't go down this route that it's all the conventional stuff is okay. Don't go down that route. Try to think differently. Now, why don't we take over this industry? Why don't we try to take over it? People think that because Islam doesn't allow interest, we can't do anything. That's not how it works. The Islamic industry, the Islamic finance industry in this country is actually thriving. Okay, especially in London, it's actually thriving. So why can't we try to get involved in that? Okay, so build alternatives. Youngsters should try to get into this as much as possible. And I mentioned here specific, as a last point, Islamative finance. This is just a specific think tank that I will be launching, inshallah. And the whole purpose of it is this kind of stuff, yes? To try and create a Sunni perspective on everything related to finance. Because everything that exists online is not from the Sunni perspective. So we're trying to create a Sunni perspective on these kind of things to create guides so that we can encourage others to try and get into this area and come up with an alternative system for finance. So if you follow, I mentioned the link there, if you follow the channel that we have, okay, at the moment it's not launched, but you can follow the Fawatih channel that we have. On that you can have all of the updates with regards to these kind of things, okay? And inshallah we can get in touch with people who are interested, who are also in this area, and we can try and inspire people to come up with an alternative system, and especially that is beneficial for the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, okay, because we don't have that in this country. So with regards to coming up with this kind of system, it's very important that we try to get into this, and inshallah the purpose of this think tank will be to do this, yes, to address all of the guides, how to do all of these things, what are the Sharia rules, and inshallah if we adopt this kind of system, then we can move away from the traditional finance system and inshallah have a unique Islamic system in this country itself. Okay? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to create such a system and to stay away from haram wealth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to adopt ihtiyat and taqwa in our life, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us away from haram wealth and haram investments. Inshallah, we stop here. I think it's almost Maghrib time. If there are questions, inshallah after Maghrib, if everyone is okay with that, we'll address the questions. They're very interesting questions. We'll deal with them after Maghrib, inshallah.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So if you can all quieten down, and those brothers at the back, you can come have a seat at the front end, inshallah ta'ala, on the chairs. So the majority of the questions, right, as mentioned earlier, it was like a hot topic was the mortgage. So a lot of people ask me this question. My position is quite clear, but we'll ask the same question. The mortgage was mentioned, and it was mentioned in quite detail, but as a straightforward answer with regards to mortgage, and is it permissible? Is it not permissible? Out of necessity, is one permissible? How many are permissible? If it's permissible, Mufti Sahib.
With regards to mortgages, we discussed in quite some detail the different positions. Like I mentioned, the classical position of the Sunni scholars from India is that in a non-Muslim country with non-Muslims, the element of interest or riba does not apply. So based on that criteria, their position is that a person, if he takes what is called interest from a bank, a non-Muslim bank, and at the same time he gives interest in the form of a mortgage, then that is permissible according to them, because it's not interest to begin with, because the fact that these banks or these institutions are not considered to be Muslim institutions. Okay, so according to their position, it's permissible, and the only issue that I mentioned was that these banks, they can't be classified as purely non-Muslim entities anymore in this day and age. So it creates a very big doubt. So the best thing to do in this day and age would be to avoid anything related to banks in terms of interest. With regards to mortgage, okay, if a person can find an alternative to a mortgage, a suitable alternative, Islamic alternative, then he should use that. If he can't find that because the difficulty of it, or he can't get it, or it's very expensive generally, Islamic mortgages are very expensive compared to that, then if he follows this position of these ulama, then he has this option to follow that position, okay, with regards to getting the mortgage. But their position is that if a person gets even 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, it doesn't matter because it's not interest to begin with. Okay, but like I said, when there's a doubt now with regards to the ownership of banks and Muslims being involved, creates so many shubhat and doubts, it's better that we completely avoid the question entirely, and we avoid them as much as we can. And if there is a case where it's the point of necessity, a person needs a house, he can't apply anywhere, and then he gets it based on this position, then he can get one, for example, house to live in, as an example, out of necessity, based on this position. But beyond that, to then make a business out of it, and then to get interest-bearing loans from all of these banks and make a whole business out of it, then this would not be permissible, based on this position that there are many Muslim shareholders that exist in many of these banks.
We had a scholar come recently to the shores of UK, and he mentioned that mortgages will be permissible. In fact, you can take as many mortgages as you want because of the fact that banks are government-based. And it's quite clear from the PowerPoint and the lecture delivered today, they're not. Right? I don't think there's any bank in this country that is government.
There's no single bank.
Right. So all of them are publicly owned. So therefore, to give the fatwa that you can take as many mortgages as you want, this would be an incorrect fatwa in line with. And this is why I mentioned this very clearly. If you have an issue with regards to the economy or the finance of this country, don't take a fatwa from someone from India or a scholar from Pakistan. They don't understand. They don't have all of the technicalities. They're not aware of it. So therefore, we can't even blame them. We blame you. Right? Why are you going to a scholar over there? We have so many muftis in this country, so many scholars over here. So go to the scholars. They are your reference point, inshallah ta'ala. They understand the context of where you're living. The second question, inshallah ta'ala, is with regards to Forex trading. Is that permissible?
Forex trading basically is currency trading, when you trade currencies. Now, if a person exchanges a currency for another currency, waits for the currency price to change, and then converts it back, there's nothing wrong with that Islamically, because it's simply a conversion or changing currencies in Islam that is permissible. The only issue that we have with Forex is it's traded online, and it's traded in a certain way where there's a lot of uncertainty and speculation involved. Now, when it comes to this kind of stuff, and I've already mentioned this briefly, trading gold online, these kind of points, the ulama generally across the board, we have many Sunni Arab scholars, okay, from the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, okay, who take the view that even currency itself holds the same ruling as gold and silver in terms of how it's supposed to be traded. Okay, many of the ulama take this view, okay, that it holds the same rules. Now, gold and silver trading requires very specific conditions. Okay, it can't be the case that you can just buy gold and silver in whatever way you want. It has very specific conditions. It has to be the case, for example, if someone is trading gold for gold, they have to do it in the same gathering. It has to be in the same gathering, and it has to be hand in hand, and there can be no debt involved. Okay, these are all criteria for gold. Okay, so many of the ulama take the position that a currency in this day and age, notes and money, is the same as gold and silver in terms of what it represents, and therefore it should follow the same rules. Okay, and many of the Sunni scholars of the subcontinent, they take the view that the currency is in one way it's a currency, in another way it's not the same as gold and silver, because it's obviously not made of metal and it's not the same criteria. So they take a view that currency in itself can be traded, and it only requires a person to take possession from one side. Meaning, if you sell currency, okay, you exchange currency, you have to give, one person has to give the other the amount in that gathering. You can't keep it as a loan. But the ulama that take the view that it represents gold and silver in its entirety, they take the view that you have to have the transaction at the same time in the same majlis. Meaning you can't have any here and there in terms of going somewhere else and then doing the transaction later. It has to happen hand in hand. Okay, so there's this difference with regards to currency. So what I've mentioned with regards to difference, you know my position based on what I've delivered today. When there's difference like this, what we say is to avoid it entirely, because you don't want to get involved in all these kind of issues for no reason. Okay, so if you exchange currency, meaning you, for example, the Indian currency right now, okay, it's very high in comparison to the pound. Yes? If someone converts the currency, keeps it in Indian currency, and then converts it back when the price goes back down, Islamically that's allowed. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not the same as Forex trading. But when you're doing it online, and you're trading different currency pairs, and you're buying one today, selling the other today, a lot of this involves a lot of speculation, and it violates many of the rules that many of the ulama consider to be strict rules that can't be violated. So it's better to avoid the online form of it. And if you look at Forex trading, you can search the statistics now. I think it's more than 80%. More than 80% of retail investors make a loss in Forex trading, because it's such a volatile market. You make a loss. So how can we then give a fatwa saying it's explicitly permissible for Muslims to invest individually in Forex based on this position that trading currency, one side is allowed? How can we do that if 80% of people are making a loss? Okay, if the majority are making a loss, then the Sharia takes the rule. If it's the majority, then we can't let people get involved in that. So when it comes to Forex online, don't trade it, avoid it. If you're talking about currency in terms of benefiting from the increase in a currency or decrease of a currency in terms of actually exchanging it and then keeping it and then waiting for the price to go down and then converting it again, that's permissible in the Sharia.
Next question is with regards to the permissibility or impermissibility of savings accounts that say they are Sharia compliant. For example, Al-Rayyan Bank or Gatehouse Bank, etc.
So we addressed this briefly in the context that we looked at when we mentioned Mudarabah. Okay, you mentioned this Mudarabah, which is an investor-based investment that we looked at. The Islamic banks, what they say is that their savings account is based on this criteria of Mudarabah. You put your money into the account, okay, as an investor, they are the worker or the one who does the effort. They invest in commodities, and whatever profit is generated from that trade and whatever amount is your investment, they give you that much percentage and then they write it as a profit percentage. So if you look at their accounts, they say our savings account has a 4% profit percentage annually. It's been receiving that much profit. So the difference between that and a loan or interest is that in a bank you put money and you give it as a loan to the bank because there's no investment involved here. You just bring it in the bank can use it if they want to. They don't give you anything except they give you money on top of your loan. That's interest. But with these banks, what they do, they use the principle of Mudarabah like I mentioned. They allow you to invest your capital in the bank, and then they then invest it on your behalf as well. Whatever profit is generated, they share it with you. So this becomes a business or partnership contract. In theory, at face value is permissible. But the issue is the way these banks do it, in certain ways, it makes a transaction very suspicious or very dubious. Now, with regards to a Rayyan bank or a specific bank, I can't tell you explicitly and say this bank is doing it in the correct way. Okay? You have to research their product entirely, and then we have to decide. That's the whole purpose of, inshallah, this think tank that we have, that these banks, the products that they have, one by one, inshallah, will be listed that this is Sharia compliant or this is not Sharia compliant based on the framework that we have from the Ahlul Sunnah scholars, inshallah. But with regards to it, generally that's how it works. But with regards to whether you should do it or you shouldn't do it, okay, I can't give you the answer with regards to specific banks unless we look at all of their structure of how it works and how they've structured the transaction.
Can a person earn a living as a finance broker, residential and or commercial, and the customers being Muslim and non-Muslim?
So this finance broker question hinges on what the finance broker is doing. So if they're a finance broker and they're helping people buy property, for example, but they're not involving themselves directly in any sin, then it's permissible to do that. But a lot of the times what finance brokers, and what they're involved in is stocks and shares, trading stocks and shares, mutual funds, index funds, these kind of, they're involved in that. And we've already discussed about stocks and shares with regards to what the scholars of the Ahlul Sunnah say with regards to it. So if a person is a finance broker in that field, then obviously the ulama are going to say that it's not permissible for that person to be a broker like this, because they don't allow this, the underlying activity that this person is doing, they don't consider it permissible to begin with, so you can't be a broker for that. So finance broker in that case, it wouldn't be permissible. But if there's if a person is doing it in a permissible way, for example, if he's involved in these kind of Islamic products and is trying to do it in an Islamic way, then it's permissible. As long as he's not dealing with interest, and as long as he's not dealing with stocks and shares, which we've already discussed, and he's not dealing with anything haram, then it will be permissible. If it's related to haram stuff that we've mentioned, then it would not be permissible.
Is Amazon FBA permissible?
Amazon FBA is, I think it stands for fulfilled by Amazon, the FBA category. What the business model behind it is, a person buys products, he lists them on Amazon, and then he sends them into Amazon, the warehouse, and then whenever it's sold, Amazon sends it to the customer, okay, with their basically delivery system, sends it to the customer, charges the seller a fee for doing that delivery and also a commission for bringing the seller to him, okay, charges that fee, and then this person takes the rest, meaning the profit, whatever is left over, is deposited into his account. Now with regards to this, it's a simple trade, and that's why it's simply permissible. Because of the fact that you bought the product, as long as you bought the product, drop shipping is not allowed. Okay, where you don't have the product and then you sell it on Amazon, and then when it sells, then you order it and then you sell it to the customer, that's not permissible. But if you actually buy the product, you list it on Amazon, you send it to Amazon so that they can fulfill it on your behalf, then the fee that they charge is permissible to pay because it's allowed for them, because they're providing a service. They're sending the product to the customer, and they're allowed to charge you a commission because they are referring customers to you by way of bringing them to your basically product page, and then when it sells, they charge you a commission. So all of that inherently is permissible, but the condition is you have to be selling a permissible product. Okay, it can't be an impermissible product, obviously. It's a permissible product, and at the same time, if it does not violate any conditions of the Sharia in terms of, for example, when I mentioned about drop shipping, it does not violate that, you have it in your possession, and then you sent it to them to fulfill it, that's permissible.
A number of questions are about cryptocurrency. I think that was covered in detail as well, so we don't need to ask that question again. The next question is it only a son's responsibility to financially support his parents, or is it the daughter's responsibility too?
According to the Sharia, it is the children's joint responsibility to financially provide for the parents. So a joint responsibility in the Sharia. If you look at the books of fiqh, they mention with regards to this nafaqah. It's a chapter on nafaqah, which means maintenance, who you have to provide for. Now a man has to provide for his wife and his children, but people don't understand that there is also criteria that you have to also provide for your parents, okay? And that is when your parents are not financially doing well, or they don't have money to basically fulfill their basic essentials, and they have no income like that, then it becomes an obligation on all of the children, including the daughters, to financially provide the parents and fulfill their basic essentials. It's not only the son. Islamically, it is a joint responsibility, and it's an equal joint responsibility in the Sharia. So even the daughter, if she has money and she has above the nisab, then she is also responsible for contributing to the maintenance of the parents. So it's not only just the son's responsibility, all of the children jointly, including the daughters, have that responsibility.
This is a hot topic again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to ask about the position on insurance, particularly in relation to different types of insurance, such as commercial insurance, etc. I'm looking for a job and there's one available for a commercial insurance company, but I don't want to get into anything haram. I will be working in IT, so not directly related to the financial side, but still would like to avoid it if there is doubt.
The question was about, firstly, it was about commercial insurance. Insurance in general, the general rule for insurance is that it's not permissible, because insurance is not a valid transaction. Today we looked at the different valid transactions. There's nothing valid about an insurance transaction. It's basically almost comparable to gambling, because you pay premiums to a company to protect you against some sort of loss. When the loss does happen, they give you extra money. If the loss doesn't happen, they take all your money. This is the same as gambling. Yes, if you put your money in the lottery and you put £5, you can win £1 million or you lose your £5. In the same way, when you're paying monthly premiums, you're trying to mitigate that loss, and this is, in the Sharia, is not allowed. So insurance in general is not allowed at all. So specifically commercial insurance and insurance on any other thing, okay, is not permissible. Now, car insurance, obviously, because of the fact that it's become mandatory to the point that without it you can't drive. So it's almost like a tax from the government. Okay, it's something that you can't control. So the ulama, like I said, about necessity and need for that, for car insurance, obviously we have to say that it's permissible to do because of the fact that it would be impossible to drive. The law of the land states that you have to have it. So it would be problematic. So in that case allowed, but any other insurance where it's your choice to get it, then it's not permissible because it's not a valid Islamic transaction. So with regards to what you mentioned about commercial insurance or any other type, working for those companies as well is better if a Muslim avoids those companies entirely. Like the person mentioned the question, they want to avoid it if there's a doubt. And insurance, like I said, by agreement, is not acceptable according to the ulama. Therefore, he should not get that job, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he's sincere with that, Allah will give him a better job, inshallah. Travel insurance, life insurance, all of it is included. Some of the ulama permit life insurance, and I mentioned about this criteria about non-Muslims and Muslims. There's this distinction that they have. But like I mentioned, in this day and age, how are you supposed to identify which company is a Muslim-owned company, meaning has Muslim shareholders or doesn't? Even life insurance is including that. You shouldn't get life insurance, you should avoid that as well. Basically, any type of insurance, you should avoid it unless, obviously, by law, it's forced upon you, then you have no other choice. Yes, it's the same. The travel insurance is the same, really. They all have the same thing. It's the criteria of the transaction is not permissible, so it's not allowed in any case. So again, obviously, in that case, we have no other choice. When it's mandated like this, it almost becomes like a tax. The sin is on them now, it's not on us.
That's not the first deviation, mashallah. Okay. The next question, inshallah ta'ala, is about are halal ETFs actually halal? Or any ETFs halal as they track price and you don't actually own the underlying asset?
I'm sure based on the presentation that you listened to today, you'll be able to answer that yourself. What do you think the answer to that question is? Let's get some interaction as well. ETFs, it tracks the price, there's no underlying asset. Why would it not be allowed? There's no asset. Alhamdulillah, mashallah, everyone was paying attention. There's no asset. An ETF is an exchange traded fund. It simply tracks the price of basically a fund. For example, the S&P 500 or whatever. It simply tracks the price. Or even there's gold ETFs as well. They simply track the price of gold. When you buy it, all you do is you're tracking the price of gold. When it goes up, you can sell it and make more money. You never bought gold. Okay, you never bought anything. You're simply tracking the price. That's gambling. It's like going into the roulette in a casino and chucking your money and saying it's going to be on black or it's going to be on red. It's the same as that. Yes, it's not permissible.
What is the ruling regarding financing for things such as furniture or a car where you cannot afford to pay outright?
Well, the answer to the question depends on if the financing is interest-free, which a lot of companies offer interest-free financing because they want their products to sell more. If a product is very expensive, they know that people are not going to be able to pay outright, so they basically allow free financing. Many products have that, where they have free financing, the company offers it without any interest whatsoever, that's permissible. If there's no interest, you're paying in installments, to pay something in installments is permissible, so that's fine. The only issue is when there is an interest element involved. Now obviously when there's an interest element involved, we're going to say that it's not permitted. There's also one extra criteria here, beyond interest, which is if a company has two different pricing. One pricing if you buy it now, and another pricing if you buy it on credit. Okay? If you pay in installments, they have a different price. That itself is not interest. Okay? Because interest is when they give you a loan and they charge you on top of that. When they're selling your product, they can charge you whatever they want. Okay, they can have different prices. As long as they fix it, that if you pay in installments, you're going to have to pay this much. As long as they don't give you a loan first. So a lot of these companies, they give you a loan. Okay, then it's not permissible because it will be interest. But if the company itself is saying, look, if you pay in installments, you're going to have to pay a bit more. If you pay outright right now, you have to pay this much. Then that's not interest. So if you pay on installments, it's permissible in that case, as long as it's not as a loan, meaning the third-party company is offering you a loan and then you are paying it. That's not permissible. But if the company itself that is selling you the product, they say to you, look, there's two forms of payment. One is outright, one is installment. Then that's permissible because that's an installment kind of deal. It's not a loan deal. If they provide you a loan and then they do that, it's not permissible. Because they're selling it to you and then saying installments, you have to pay this much, that's permissible. So there's different criteria in financing, basically. If you financing it with a loan, with interest, not allowed. You finance it without any interest, permissible. And if the company has different pricing and they directly are giving you the different pricing without it being a loan, then it's also permissible to pay on the installment. Yeah, so even if they say, like I said before, just because someone posts something interest, it's not always interest. Because of the conditions of the Sharia. They write it because legally they have to write it. But in that case, you need to be careful because a lot of these companies, they don't have financing themselves, they'll give you financing from another company. That becomes haram because that's a loan now. It's not them selling you the product, they get the loan for you. Basically, for example, I'll give you just a quick example. When you're buying a technology product, as an example, Apple, let's say you're buying an iPhone. If you go on the website and buy the iPhone, you can see on the financing options, either they have 0% financing options where you don't have to pay anything, or they have Barclays or PayPal or whatever, and they mention 14%, 15%. That Barclays and PayPal that they've added there, that would be a loan from another company. It wouldn't be an installment basis. Whereas Apple, when they're charging you directly, then they can charge whatever installment they want. That wouldn't be interest Islamically.
Are we in danger of continuously delving further into the depths of a particular topic in order to find a great enough answer, whereby we can justify the action we want to take?
Well, the question shouldn't be asked to us. The question should be asked to certain other people, okay, where they make certain things permissible, and then they say certain things are impermissible. And the criteria what I mentioned, for example, stocks and shares. On the one hand, they will say interest in banks and this and that is all haram, and you can't do this, you can't do that. Yes, this is the criteria that many of the certain people who permit stocks and shares, that's what they say. But then when it comes to these companies, then they say when the company is doing it, it's okay. So why is there a different position? It's because, like mentioned in the question, when they go down this area, is trying to find the gray area, they try to justify it by saying that 33%, 5%. They try to create a criteria because they want to permit something and they don't want to permit something else. So this kind of system is based on nafs, okay? The system with deciding these matters, it has to be consistent and has to be in line with Islam. If there is a gray area in Islam, meaning Islam permits certain things and certain things can be tweaked in transactions, then that option is available for the ulama to give. But trying to go down the route, nowadays if you go online and you ask, like online you just type in, is this allowed, is that allowed? I guarantee you with every single thing there'll be a position that says it's allowed. Every single one. It doesn't matter. In this day and age, even if you type in probably online, is it permissible for Muslims to eat pig? Right? There'll be a fatwa there somewhere saying it's permissible because of istihala, right? Chemical transformation has occurred and now it's permissible to eat pig. You can find anything online. That's because people go down this route of trying to make things permissible just for the sake of it. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to find what the Sharia is saying about a modern matter, follow it, and if there's a leeway and the Sharia itself is offering that leeway, or there's necessity and need, then we give that option. Otherwise, we don't go down the route of permit whatever we want because we want to benefit from it. and disallow whatever we want because there's another agenda involved. Okay, so we have to be careful with the balance.
Assalamu alaikum. Is NHS pension allowed?
The question about pensions, specifically the question asked about NHS pensions, with regards to pensions, there's different types of pensions. Right? The private sector has its own type of pension, and the public sector, which is basically related to the civil service to some extent, has its own kind of pension. One is called contribution. One is called a contribution, defined contribution, and one is called the defined benefit. Yes, there's different types of pensions that exist. The defined contribution one is mostly in the private sector. Every single month, they take a certain amount from your salary, and then you agree on a pension fund. Okay, they give you the option, and they say, do you want to invest in these and these pension funds? So you're basically making the pension fund an agent on your behalf to invest in different commodities or different stocks and shares and whatever it may be, and then the employer also gives a certain amount. This, like I said, the underlying ruling is based on what they're investing in. If they're investing in stocks and shares, then obviously we've looked at the ruling of that, it wouldn't be permissible, because investing in stocks and shares, and our ulama said it's not permissible. If they're investing in an alternative, for example, real estate, okay, and it's permissible and it's not based on interest-based things, then that kind of contribution or that kind of pension is permissible. You have the choice when you look at the list, because I've seen the list that many of the employers they give, and they have like halal pension providers and halal. That's based on what other people say about the 33% and all of this. That's not what our ulama agree on. So even that is not technically halal according to us. So defined contribution pension is not allowed when it invests in stocks and shares. If there's an alternative way it's investing in a Islamic approved real estate kind of trust, then there's scope for permissibility. When it's investing in stocks and shares, which it generally does, it's not permissible, because even those who allow it, they don't allow you to invest in any type of stocks and shares. They have a criteria. Our ulama say completely not allowed. But the NHS pension that they're asking about, defined benefit, which is not based on your contributions, more so it's based on different factors, how long you work there, and there's a lot of different factors not based on your contribution. Now the question is, when you contribute, what will that contribution count as? Does that contribution count as a loan that you're giving to the pension provider, or is it considered to be like a community fund where you're just giving money and in the future they can give you money? Okay, this is something that is subject to further research. Our ulama, they don't have specific guidance on this particular point. That's why inshallah there'll be more research on this, and inshallah the answer to this question specifically about defined benefit contributions, whether are they qarz, meaning are they considered debt, do they fall under the community fund kind of idea where it would be permissible, or is there another kind of ruling for it? Inshallah that will be research, and then the research will be published inshallah.
Is it permissible to set up an extended warranty for appliances through companies like Domestic and General?
Extended warranty is not permissible, because what are you buying with an extended warranty? Okay, it's not a tangible asset. There's nothing involved. An extended warranty is just a right. Now, Islam doesn't allow you to just sell certain things as rights. You can't say I have the right to return this product whenever I want. You can't make these conditions yourself, because a right, something that's a right, cannot be sold because it doesn't have an existence. Okay, so a warranty that is sold with the product is permissible. So when you buy a fridge and they say to you this fridge comes with a 5-year extended warranty, and it's already included in the price, meaning it's just £700 for the fridge, and the company, because they want to sell it and it's like a marketing trick, they say it's 5 years, guarantee is included. When you buy it with the product, it's permissible because the company itself is giving that option. When they say to you that, do you want to buy an extended warranty for £50? That buying the extended warranty is not permissible, because Islam does not consider extended warranty to be some kind of transaction. Okay, so when it's with the product and it comes with the product, like your laptop comes with a 1-year warranty, your phone comes with a 1-year warranty, fridges come with like a longer warranty, appliances also, all that's allowed because it comes with the product. You're not paying an extra price for it. But if you're paying an extra price for an extended warranty, that's not permissible in Islam, because it's not a product, okay, that you're selling. It's a right, and Islam is not allowed to sell right. It's called mujarrad, hukuk mujarrad, right? Just an outright basic right. You can't sell those things. So because it's not a product, you can't sell it. If it's included, then it's permissible.
Are student loans finance loans and maintenance loans, are they permissible?
So this question, like I said, would be what I said about mortgages, the same rule applies here. The ulama who take the position that from non-Muslims, the loans and such is not considered to be interest, for example, they would permit it, okay, and say that student loans are permitted because of that, okay, because it wouldn't be interest to begin with. They would say that, okay, that's their position that they would take. Now, one thing that is very interesting now is that student finance, the government, they have come up with a system of alternative financing where they've used certain Islamic principles that we've discussed, okay, that are already popular in the Muslim world, and they're coming up with a Sharia-compliant, basically, loan. I'm calling it a loan because obviously student loans, that's why, but they're coming up with a Sharia-compliant version of that, okay? Now, whether it be fully Sharia-compliant or not, that's obviously we have to research that, but there is an alternative coming now. So the best thing to do is to avoid it as much as you can, and to try and adopt when they come up with this. I think they mentioned 2026, that they might come up, as in they might release it to the public, where Muslims can then sign up for that alternative method instead of using the basic loan method. So that in the future we have this alternative. But as for now, like I said, the ulama that take that position, they would allow it, and certain people would also say about necessity. But my position on this particular matter is to avoid it as much as you can, because there is a certain level of interest obviously involved in that, and because what we want to do is try to avoid interest as much as we can, it's better that a person goes down the different route of adopting what the government is coming out with in terms of a Sharia compliant model. Inshallah, that will be beneficial for Muslims so they can avoid interest entirely.
Do you think the Darura principle, which is applied in purchasing a house, applies in student loans as well?
It could do, according to some ulama, it does apply, because if it was the case that Muslims don't go to university, for example, at all in its entirety, then Muslims fall behind entirely. They're not in any profession, they can't get ahead. Then what are you supposed to do when the universities are, for example, charging £10,000 annual fees? Now people can't pay £10,000. So it could be the case, and many ulama do permit it in that way, that it's a necessity because of the fact that without it, it would not be possible for a person to gain further education, and it's almost like a force from the government, because they haven't kept the system free for the Muslims, or for anyone in general. They haven't kept it free, okay? And they've kind of put this system where they made it extortionately expensive for the reason that they can give loans to people and make money on it. That's the only reason that they've introduced it. Otherwise, at one point, student finance or student loans didn't exist. Okay, many people have been to university without any having to pay any tuition fees, or they paid a very minimal amount. Now it's extortion. Okay, so some ulama do take that position. My position on this particular matter is to avoid as much as possible, just to avoid any of the difference of opinion and doubts in this area.
In a Mudarabah agreement, is it allowed to partner with someone whose wealth you know is haram?
Well, if you know with certainty that their wealth is 100% haram, then it's not permissible. But if it's the case that they have some haram wealth and they have some halal wealth, okay, then in that case it becomes permissible if it's not known with certainty that the wealth that they're using is 100% the wealth that is haram, that is impermissible. But in any case, you should be a Muslim, you should completely avoid that out of taqwa. Meaning, why be involved with someone whose wealth itself is dubious? You're trying to do an Islamic partnership and trying to follow the Islamic rules, at the same time you've got someone whose wealth itself is dubious. Why go down that route? It's better to not involve such a person and involve people whose wealth is entirely halal and they don't have any haram aspects to their wealth. It's permissible because all of his money is not going to be from that. So, no, so this is the point I'm making, that when a person deals with certain things, certain haram things, it's not the case that all of what he has is haram. Okay? It's the case that some elements of what he does is haram and some elements of what he does is halal. So in that case, when it's mixed income, then it becomes permissible for us to deal with him. Otherwise, it would be impossible to deal with anyone in the world, because many people have haram aspects to their wealth. As far as we're concerned, as long as we don't know with certainty that what he's giving us is from haram, we can take it according to the Sharia. This is the principle, and Imam Ahmad Rida rahimahullah ta'ala in his Fatawa Radwiyah, he's mentioned this point. When asked about this question, he's mentioned that as long as with certainty you don't know that what he's providing you with is from the haram part and he has mixed wealth, then you can take it. But taqwa, again, ihtiyat is to avoid it as much as you can, but the permissibility still exists. It's permissible, yes.
Someone has an interest-based mortgage or loan. Can they use the overdraft to overpay? This charges interest but lowers the rate than the original loan. So can you get another interest-based loan at a lower rate to pay off the higher one?
So yeah, there's two ways to see it. Either it's doing more haram to stop yourself from doing some other haram, or you can see as lesser of the two evils. You can see from both of those perspectives. With regards to that question, we already know with regards to the position that I mentioned that some ulama allow this kind of transaction. As I've mentioned, in this country and nowadays in the world, with different companies having different structures, Muslims involved, this, that, the other, it would be the case that if a person has a mortgage, it would be better that he repay the mortgage as quickly as possible to remove himself from the interest element. Completely repay as quickly as possible. But it doesn't mean that he then gets more interest to then pay off the interest. Instead, he should just try to pay off that, what he has, within his ability, and pay off the interest, the mortgage and the loans that he already has, quickly to free himself of that.
I have a few years left for my current mortgage in the house I'm living in, which is a business property. So I pay business rates in interest. Number one, is thus mortgage halal? Okay, so you use thus, which is Shakespearean English, and then the rest of it makes no sense. So is thus mortgage halal?
Is it a business mortgage?
Yeah, a business mortgage.
So we already know, we've discussed this plenty of times. Some ulama permit it. My position, or my understanding in this day and age, is that when there's so much shubhat and doubt with regards to the ownership of banks and Muslims being involved, a Muslim should avoid it entirely, even if it's business-based loans or anything else. All matters related to interest with banks should be entirely avoided, and you should try and seek an alternative, okay, with regards to financing. There's Islamic alternatives that are available, like I said. You can try and seek that and not go down this route. That is the most cautious position in this day and age.
The same brother or sister has asked us another question. I now have a second property which I have a buy-to-let mortgage on, and I receive £800 rent, but then I only pay 600 to the bank as a repayment every month. So is this halal mortgage, and is the extra £200 I earn from the rent halal or not?
So there's multiple questions there. The first question is getting the buy-to-let mortgage in the first place permissible? Like I said, a group of ulama that we have, they say that because it's not interest to begin with, that mortgage will be permissible. But like I said, with regards to that, we have to completely avoid it because we don't know about banks. Okay, so it's the same answer all the time, whatever type of mortgage it may be, it doesn't matter. Because now we have this shubha, this big doubt with regards to the ownership of banks. We can't just keep saying it's non-Muslim and it's Muslim, this, that. You can't argue that anymore in this day and age. It's very difficult to argue that. When there's these doubts involved, then a person should completely avoid it and not get mortgages like that. Now the question is, when you do get the mortgage or loan, is that loan haram? The answer to the question is no, meaning the money that they give you is not haram. Okay, you paying interest is haram. You paying the extra element is haram, would be permissible. But the money that the bank gave you, the 100,000 or 200,000, whatever they gave you as a loan, okay, that loan money is halal. If you use it to buy a property, that property is also halal. Okay, because you use the halal money, meaning it's not haram money in its entirety. Okay, you then paying the extra sums in interest, that becomes haram. Your property is not haram when you buy it with this kind of loan. You getting that loan in the first place, the interest that you agreed to, that's haram. But the money that you used to buy the property is halal. So when the person rents it out now, even though we would say to him that what you did was impermissible because you got the mortgage to begin with, but because the money that you used was from the bank, the interest that you give is haram, but the money that you used to buy the property, that's halal. So the rental income is halal. Okay, so rental income is halal, but you paying interest is haram. Now with regards to the question of £600 and £800, the reason why this person has asked this question is because some ulama take the view that if you can earn more money, okay, from the rent, then the interest that you pay to the bank, then it becomes permissible because it's not interest to begin with. Now, I've already answered that question that a lot of these banks are Muslim shareholders in this day and age. It creates a very serious doubt, and therefore, in my understanding, it will still fall under riba, meaning impermissible. It will still be impermissible to do that. So a person should, like I said, the rental income will be halal because the money he's used is halal. But paying interest every time, that element is the haram part.
So there's fatwa there present, and based upon that, the principles that they mentioned, he then deducts on the basis of the context of UK. So there's fatwa already present, and then whether it fits this or not, that's how it's applied. Because the issue, again, the wide issue I'm seeing is this. Every single time I have a scenario of, okay, non-Muslims, but
yeah, so the point that you mentioned, I understand what you're trying to say. We're living in this country permanently, and we have to deal with these kind of situations. Is it wise in this day and age to say that we're living in a non-Muslim land, and therefore the non-Muslims, and you can do this, that, the other with the non-Muslims? Is it wise to say that, or is it wise to say that still follow the rules of the Sharia and don't deal with it entirely? Okay, because we have to live here permanently. Now you have to understand that the context of what the ulama wrote certain things in certain times, they weren't living in those countries with non-Muslims. Okay, now we're living in countries with non-Muslims. If we go around with this criteria that you're allowed to do X, Y, Z with non-Muslims, for example, then that means all of these rules that we've talked about today don't apply in any case. Okay, whether that be renting or selling, none of the rules apply. Then we've just got this system where Muslims in this country have one set of rules where they can do whatever they want with non-Muslims in terms of business transactions, and then they have another set of rules, okay, with regards to what they can do with Muslims, for example. So it's the case of there's no point bringing this discussion in this day and age. Like I said, even if you want to talk about banks and other companies, you can no longer say in this day and age that this company is a non-Muslim company because of the fact that they have millions of shareholders and now Muslims are investing in stocks and shares anyway. How do you decide whether this company is Muslim or not Muslim? So it makes sense in this day and age to completely just avoid that whole discussion and stick to the principles of the Sharia as much as you can, that these are the rules of the Sharia, they apply in all cases. That is the most cautious thing for a person to do. And inshallah there's some research on this, and I've written a very detailed research on this. Inshallah will be released in the near future with regards to this context of non-Muslims dealing with non-Muslims, and whether the position of Imam Abu Hanifa is actually what he has been made out to be. Is it actually that? Okay, inshallah we'll be analyzing that, and that will be released inshallah in the near future. As in, we have Sunni scholars here from the UK, but they're from the subcontinent specifically. They're from India, but they. Yeah, so we have ulama that mention certain things. For example, the ulama differ on this kind of thing. Some ulama say it's better to just allow, for example, one mortgage for a person if you can't get any other form of financing, to allow one mortgage for a house, because how else are you supposed to buy a house? So some ulama say out of necessity one is allowed. Then certain other ulama, they take the position that because it's not interest to begin with, you can take as many as you want. Now this kind of approach, it leads to people going down the route of doing so many things that then become haram. So it's better to go down, take the criteria of if one out of necessity, then it's acceptable in that criteria. And then in terms of other loans and other mortgages, to completely avoid it, because it's better to be on the safe side. So there's one position which is necessity. There's another position which is do whatever, basically, with regards to this kind of stuff. Many of the ulama in the UK, Sunni ulama, from the subcontinent, from India, they take this position. It's permissible, in any context, and you can do as many as you want. And I don't personally, and I can't say with regards to these ulama because all of these are more senior to me. They are my teachers or the teachers of our teachers. They are more respectable than us. We don't say anything with regards to their ilm. We respect their ilm. But the point simply is there might be a different mindset to kind of have in this day and age, given the fact that we have to live in this country entirely and all the time. There might be a different mindset that we can give and not taking anything away from basically these ulama. We're not bringing them down. We're simply saying there's a better alternative of just being more cautious, basically. Sorry? No, so this is what the criteria I'm mentioning. Some ulama say out of necessity, if you do it, then it's not impermissible. Meaning if you have a necessity, meaning you can't get a loan from anywhere else, you need to buy a house, and there's no other way of getting money. Sorry? Yeah, you have this is one of the issues as well. That you have the renting option, but the only problem with renting is it's very expensive. There's no security involved, and there's a lot of problems involved with renting as well. So some of the ulama mentioned that when you're paying so much more in renting, you're wasting your money by giving it, and you don't get any ownership, for example, and you're still in a situation where you could struggle with regards to financial security. So they mentioned with regards to necessity that look, if we go down this route and we say, look, if they get one for their own house, that's permissible. Some take that view that out of necessity it's like that, okay, because renting can still pose its problems. But like I said, in this day and age, it's better to avoid it, and now these Islamic finance options are coming about. It's good to try and explore those options, and at the very least Muslims and Sunnis should try to get into that so that we don't have to have this discussion. Inshallah, my vision is that in the next 10 years, we don't have this discussion, and instead we're having the discussion of which Islamic financial provider, Sunni one, I'm going to use to buy my house, inshallah. So we're going to try to build this mindset, not this mindset of do what you want with regards to these kuffar banks and non-Muslim banks. No, let's build a Muslim system. So inshallah, we'll try and build this mindset in the next 10 years we have this kind of system instead. And we don't have this system where we have to ask these questions of necessity and this, that, the other. We'll have an alternative, inshallah. The problem is, like I said, with Islamic mortgages, that some of them are acceptable to some extent. In theory, they are. But we have to analyze the transaction of how they're doing it. Until we don't analyze every single one of them, we can't say specifically that this bank provider is allowed, this one's not allowed. I can't say with certainty because that would be me saying that I've analyzed all of their dealings and I can tell you with certainty that they do it correctly. So we have to then go through each one. So inshallah, the plan is with this think tank is to go through each one and all of the providers and try to give an option that this is Sharia compliant according to us and it's not Sharia compliant according to us. Inshallah, that's the kind of idea and the plan. Inshallah. You could go down that route, but the problem is if it's still not based on a valid transaction, it's almost the same. Although one would be more haram than the other, because one is riba, is outright riba is haram, and the other would be almost like an invalid transaction. There's a slight difference between invalid transaction and void transactions in the Sharia. One is lesser in terms of its sin. So you can't go down that route, but like I said, we don't advise that in that sense, because until we don't analyze each one, we can't tell you and say with certainty, because that would be basically speaking from our own opinion, and it's not permissible in that. Yeah? So that's what I have to say with a caveat that in theory, the structure is sound in the Sharia, but is this provider doing it exactly according to Islamic, like the Islamic way? We can't say with certainty unless we analyze each one, inshallah.
I have a question about the Murabaha agreement, the arrangement. So you said in the speech that just because somebody calls something interest doesn't mean that it's interest. And also you mentioned just now that the second person in a Murabaha agreement, the person who's paying off the initial purchase, only becomes the owner of the property at the end. So there's sort of like a devil's advocate opinion that I've heard about mortgages, that the bank would not give you the capital for that if there was no property involved, and they will repossess the house if you don't keep up your payments. That's a maxim. So in that case, they are technically the owner of the house until you finish paying them off. Could somebody reframe that or try to reframe that as a Murabaha?
No, because the bank gives you a loan. That's the difference. The bank doesn't buy your property. There's never a case that the bank ever receives a risk of your property, because they only give you money. They'll only give you £100,000 in your bank to buy the property. They will never buy it themselves. The difference in a Murabaha is that the bank or the financial provider buys the property first and then sells it. So that's a different story.
Where's the distinction there?
So for example, a bank is providing £100,000 and they're giving it you and they're saying, go buy your property and we're going to put a charge against it. Until you don't pay it back, you have to pay a certain amount of interest. They give you money. They didn't give you a property. In this case, the bank or the financial provider, whoever is doing the Murabaha transaction, they buy the actual property. See the difference? One buys it, the other is giving you a loan to buy it. So this is what I mean when the Quran says, "Ahallallahu al-bay' wa harrama riba." This is what the non-Muslims said. That if it's a business transaction, why is it allowed? If it's loan, it's not. Allah says Allah permitted business transactions and did not permit riba. That's the only distinction there is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited you to do riba and has permitted business. So when there's a transaction involved and a sale involved, then profit becomes permissible. When a loan is involved, profit does not become permissible. And with regards to Murabaha that I mentioned about the owner, the person becomes the owner at the end, I'm going to take that back, and I'm going to clarify that inshallah some other time, because I don't want to speak on that particular point, because at this moment in time, it's not clear in my mind. Yes, with regards to that point, whether the person becomes the owner at the end or at the start. In a general idea, he would become the owner as soon as he completes the sale, even if he's paying on installment, he would become the owner technically. That's what the position should be. But like I said, I'm not going to comment on it in a firm way until I check it. Yes, because it's important to not comment on certain things if you don't have the understanding of it right now. Yes?
Going back to pension, if a person's already contributed to a pension scheme, obviously what's the full out now? There are two different elements to it: employee contribution, tax relief, and then you've got the return of whatever they're investing. If the person wants to pull out of that now, how much of that money can you keep? Because obviously he's contributed to it as well. And how much of that money does he then give away?
So whatever the contributions, so this is, I'm telling you the cautious position, what to do. The money that he contributed and the money that the employee contributed, these two are basically just contributions. Any money that's increased beyond that will be based on the investment. So it's better to not take that and to just keep the contribution amount. You can keep that contribution, but it's better to clear yourself of the extra that they have given, just to be on the safe side. This is like I said, my framework is based on Ihtayat, right? Being cautious. Okay, other ulama might give you a different fatwa, but my position is simply, it's better to be cautious in that case because your contribution is halal, right? Your contribution is halal, the employer's contribution is halal. The only issue that we have is the extra that has generated in there based on the investment. So on that extra, it's better to just not take it and give it in sadaqah, just to be on the safe side. Yeah, so if there's a pension, if there's a fund basically that has a halal option, not the stocks and shares one, we're talking about the real estate version. If they have a real estate version which is Islamic, okay, then there might be an option to invest in that. I'm not saying, like I said, I can't say 100% certainty until we don't know the criteria, but it's better, that would be way better than stocks and shares, because real estate is less controversial. No, so that's normal real estate. There are other providers that are Islamic real estate providers. What they do is they avoid financing through interest. And that's why it's a real estate trust based on Islamic principles. So if there's an option like that, you can try and explore that option. But as far as the stocks and shares are concerned, it's better to completely avoid that in pensions as well. Yeah, in terms of zakah becomes wajib to give when you actually take the money. But then you have to backdate it. Okay, you still have to backdate. This is a confusion that many people have, because money, with regards to money that comes into your possession, it's like a loan. If you give someone a loan, £50 for example, you don't have to give zakat on that £50 right now. When he gives it you back, then for how many years he took the loan for, you have to backdate it and give zakat like that. So it's still backdated. So it's better, if you have a pension scheme in this way, and it's like structured in a halal way, for example, then you give, at the end of the year, the total, you just give zakah on that annually, so you don't have to do all the calculations when you actually get the amount. Yeah, from now. This would. So the problem with this pension and zakat is, some scholars take the view that because the pension is investing in stocks and shares, for example, and stocks and shares are investing in a company, and a company has like business stocks, money, and real estate. Some of those things are zakatable assets, some of those things are not zakatable assets. So your investment is to the extent of whatever is zakatable in them companies. So then they have this criteria where they say you give 25% of the total pension fund. Now this position, none of our ulama mentioned this kind of position. There's really no guidance on it from our ulama. Like I said, inshallah, the plan is to do more research on this kind of stuff and then have clear guidance on if this is the way to do it, or if this is permissible, if zakat is to be given in this way. The most cautious thing to do would be, if you do have it, to give the total contribution, the total amount, and then to just take zakat on the total, just to be cautious. The government pension is based on a defined benefit contribution. So the answer to that question is based on what is the amount of money that you've given? What is it? Is it considered to be a loan that you've given to the pension scheme? Is it considered to be just money that you've given without any conditions at all? The answer to that question would depend on what that is. And like I said already about this, that the answer to this question, inshallah, we're going to research about, are the defined benefit contributions, are they considered qard, or are they considered to be some other type and it's permissible? If it's another type and it's permissible and it's not a loan, for example, then zakat is not applicable in those transactions because that's not your money at this moment in time. Whereas for a pension, it is your money, defined contribution when it is your money at this moment in time because you've made them an agent to invest on your behalf. So it's technically like you own the money.
How many more questions do we handle? Because it will be here until Fajr. Okay, bismillah. Huh?
Sorry.
No Isha.
Yeah. Again, it's based on the same discussion that we've had. Many of the ulama will say because it's a non-Muslim government, for example, the money that you're giving them is not interest technically, and it will be permissible. But like I said, many ulama of the subcontinent as well have taken this approach that how do you define whether the government is a Muslim government or not in a democracy? And that's another issue as well. There's another shubha there. With that as well, like I said, anything that has interest to it and is Islamically considered to be interest to some extent, meaning it's on a loan or it's because you made a late payment. In all of those cases, the best position, the cautious position, or the Ihtayat-based position is to avoid it entirely. So when you have HMRC and you not pay the tax and you're giving them interest, that technically is also interest. But it's better that you give them whatever they're asking for before this accrues, so that you avoid all of the difference of opinions and all of the sin that might be associated with it. Okay, so there's 3 questions. We start with the first one again. Buying game coins and things like that. The big issue with that is, if you buy a game coin and then you have to use those coins and then you make more coins, for example, or you make more money, that's almost tantamount to gambling as well. Yes? Because there's an element of you buying with your own currency and then you're basically playing the game, for example, and then you might win more or you lose your money as well. There's a lot of gambling involved in that in terms of the Sharia perspective, because there's a risk of loss there with regards to your capital, and you're putting on a chance, okay, that you might win this game, you might not win this game. There's a lot of issues with that. So with regards to that, I can't see a way where something like that will be permissible to buy, because of the fact that it has no tangibility, it has no utility, and the way it's used mostly is to buy something in a game, and then, for example, what I've seen with youngsters, they buy like skin and stuff like that. Yeah, I've seen these people address these questions all the time. They buy skins that you can use on your character. You're basically paying someone money so that you can have a digital color on the screen. Okay, it's not very smart for a Muslim. So again, that's another concept of israf as well. Extravagance comes into it, that you're wasting your money doing nothing. So from that perspective, it's also impermissible. So Muslims, and especially youngsters, should avoid these kind of things. Don't waste your money on things like that, because it has no value to you. And the second question was? So digital posters, I mentioned this briefly in the cryptocurrency section. Cryptocurrency has no utility, it has no benefit, it has no use except for speculating, right? So we're going to keep the original ruling. The original ruling is goods have to be tangible in order to be traded. Cryptocurrency is not good and therefore it can't be traded. Now, with regards to certain things that have now become digital and they are being traded by everyone, then is that going to be allowed? And the answer to that question is, remember when I mentioned about when the ulama discussed about new matters, necessity, okay? In that case, because the business goods, for example, like software, digital software, everyone buys digital software, for example, posters or images, this, that, the other, all of this is intangible. When a person buys it, not speculating, he's not buying it because he wants to sell it and make money from it, okay? He's not speculating on the price of it, he's going to increase it, he's just buying it as a product, okay? Because it's being used as a product and not speculating, and it's being used as a business trade, okay, then it becomes permissible based on the criteria that people have started to deal with it as goods. Okay, so there's a criteria of necessity that applies. But with cryptocurrency at this moment in time, like I said, in the future it's possible that if the UK government decides that they're going to make a cryptocurrency and it becomes the currency of the country, no alim is going to say it's not allowed anymore because it becomes a necessity. In the same way with goods that are being sold online, when they're not used like this, like cryptocurrency, where they're used for speculating, and they have a utility, okay, like digital software has a utility, then that can be sold and it's permissible. And the third question I had was in regards to copyright. The copyright is a difference of opinion among the scholars. It's very difficult to address it from a classical perspective because the fuqaha haven't dealt with it specifically in terms of copyright. Is copyright something that is valid in Islam, or is it not valid in Islam in terms of, can you have the case where this paper, I've produced this paper and now you can't copy it? Is there some kind of issue involved? Many ulama take the view that copyright does have some basis in Islam. Some ulama take the view that it has no basis in Islam. There's a difference of opinion, and I can't give you either way with regards to that. There's a difference of opinion of the ulama with regards to this point.
You mentioned that all types of insurance forbidden, but I know some of the, like regarding home insurance, some of the scholars from some countries have said that home insurance is permissible because if you went, you would not have it, something would happen, and you'd be put in jeopardy.
Yeah, but that is the very definition of insurance. You are paying premiums to mitigate a risk that might happen. That's the very definition of gambling. Now, when a person pays some money in order to mitigate some losses, then that is gambling. In order to mitigate his risk in the future, he pays some money and someone will then pay him more in the future. This is insurance, the very definition of gambling as well. It's not permissible. I don't know which ulama. As far as I know, I don't think any of the ulama that I have seen their positions allow insurance, home insurance. The only difference they have is on life insurance, but many of them don't take the position with regards to home insurance and other insurances. And like I said, it's the same as buying apps and software. It's the same, okay, in this day and age, because it's used as goods. Islam considers it to be a good out of necessity and need. So it's permissible if a person buys an app that actually is useful for him, for example, then it's permissible because of this criteria of need in this day and age. Digital software, it's a need in our time because people are not speculating with apps. They're not buying an app to speculate with it and to trade the price, for example. They're simply buying it to use it. In the same way as digital software, it's the same. Game apps, again, it would be inherently it's permissible, but based on this concept of israf, extravagance, then there would be an issue there with regards to spending money in order for lahu la'ib, which is what is mentioned. Lahu la'ib means pastime and amusement. Spending money for that, the Sharia considers that to be israf.
Regarding the argument of shares, the argument of shares in banks, we say that it's quite reasonable to assume that the Muslim shareholder therefore Riba. So would you also say that for insurance companies as well?
Yes, all public companies. That's the argument. The argument is that it's all companies that exist in this day and age that are very large and deal with this kind of stuff. They are PLC, public limited companies, that their shares are traded publicly on the stock exchange. Anyone can buy them. And therefore, in many companies, we see that there are actually Muslim investors, and others we don't know for sure, but it's possible, very possible, because anyone can buy it.
So, like, for instance, car insurance, there's a car, they weren't common as the whole one, etc. So, would it be allowed to engage in gambling with a Muslim or something that's harder?
Yeah, so this is the question of, this is what the ulama will decide. The ulama have decided that because in this day and age, if you don't get the insurance, it's not about the fact that if you don't get it, if you have an accident, you're going to have to pay more. It's not about that. It's about the fact if you don't get it, then if you're arrested or if the police stop you, then you're going to get points, you're going to get a fine. There's all these other problems that occur because of that necessity. The ulama have allowed it.
The problem is though, like, you don't have to drive a car, there's no law forcing you to drive a car. So I guess the argument would be justified if you don't have the car in order to go through that problem. If it's actually what we consider to be gambling.
No, so this is what the point of the ulama is that to some extent there is a necessity that without a car there is a hardship for people, because if you have to use public transport all the time, and because in this case it's the government that is forcing us to do certain things, is beyond our control. So the ulama take this criteria of necessity in that, and once the ulama decides something like that, it's not usually based on whatever criteria they have, their thinking behind it. They've already addressed what you've addressed, which is it a necessity to begin with? They've already looked at all of that, and they've decided that in the end, if the government is forcing people, without it's going to cause problems, then we have to go down this route of necessity that to some extent it's not our issue. What we're going to do if the government is forcing us.
I thought with the ulama that you give a ruling about it, they give it on the assumption that the non-Muslim company, they don't.
No, so it's not just that. That's one element of it, because they don't allow insurance with non-Muslim companies as well if there's no benefit for you specifically. So the ones that do allow non-Muslim companies, for example, life insurance, some say that if it's a non-Muslim company and you can get more benefit from it, they permit it. But the ones with regards to other insurance, because there is no benefit like that, it's always a loss most of the times, they don't allow it either with anyone. It doesn't matter if it's a non-Muslim bank or whether it's a non-Muslim company. So in any case, necessity rule always applies as per what the ulama mentioned with regards to car insurance specifically. If a person makes an agency contract with the company, then it becomes permissible. With the company that's selling it, if he says to the company that, do you give me permission to sell your product in this market, then so you have to ask whoever's selling it that can I trade this product, but the problem with that is you can't increase the price, you have to get the commission from the agent. You understand? If you can't increase the price because then that would be drop shipping again. In this, when it's an agency contract, what you're doing, you're simply telling the person who's selling it that, look, I'll sell it on your behalf, but I want you to give me 10% commission. Okay, that's allowed in the Sharia because you can be an agent to sell someone's product, but you can't then increase the price yourself. You have to charge whatever he's charging, and then you have to take a commission from him, not the customer. In the Sharia, it works like that in terms of agency. So that's why drop shipping itself is not, this model of agency is not going to work in a drop shipping model. That's why we say in general that drop shipping is not permissible, because you don't own the goods, and it leads to speculation and problems and uncertainty with regards to trade, that a person does not involve himself in drop shipping, because the criteria is a person must own what he sells, or at least possess what he sells. Or if he doesn't have any of those, then he's an agent on behalf of the person who owns it. Okay, these are the criteria. If you don't have any of that, then you don't have any right to sell it, and therefore it's not permissible to begin with.
Answer that too. But with regards to dropshipping, then isn't that very similar to almost middleman in the deal? Because if you know that you can, let's say, get this water bottle, and now you find a seller which is going to pay you £5 more, if you don't own the stock of this water bottle, then you can ask the seller to fulfill the same for you. That therefore you don't spend on overdraft.
Yeah, but the point is Islam has its rules, and one of the rules is, in order to sell something, you have to possess it, or you have to own it, or you have to be an agent on behalf of someone who owns it. So if you are selling a product that you don't own to begin with, then that transaction that person does with you is not a business transaction, because you're not selling something to him because you don't own it in the first place. So Sharia says that drop shipping itself, to not be involved in that, because you don't have possession or ownership. That's one of the conditions of a business transaction. Instead, buy the product and then put a markup, margin, and sell it for profit. Why is that so hard? Okay, it's because people want to make quick money in this day and age. They don't want to follow these rules, and they want to say that it should be allowed in this day and age, this, that, the other. The Sharia has its own criteria. We're going to say it's not permissible. Follow the criteria of the Sharia. Buy the product, advertise it, sell it, the profit they make, permissible. But don't drop ship it where you don't own it to begin with and then you sell it. Don't do that kind of business model, because it's not permitted in the Sharia.
We'll have a look at it. We'll send it. We'll do it. We'll do it. Last question. Okay.
Well, like I said about israf to begin with, lahw wa la'ib, spending money for pastime and amusement and wasting your money in this way, the Sharia basically either is disliked or will be completely impermissible. Now, if it's in a certain limit, if a person is playing games, for example, within a certain limit, just plays 1 or 2 games, and it's not gambling involved. Remember, if it's a game where you have to chuck something, and if it lands on something, then you get a prize, but you don't get your money back, for example, that's a gambling type of game. If it's another game where you just pay money and you get access to be able to play the game, then that's permissible, as long as the person does not go too into it and become basically consumed by it to the point where he's now spending all his time doing that and does not fulfill his obligations. So within a limit, we can have certain things, we can do certain things with regards to pastime and amusement, for example, but with getting too involved in it, the Sharia would say that it's going to lead to israf to some extent. Extravagance, meaning spending money on useless things.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think we shall conclude over here. We're incredibly and deeply thankful to Mufti Kalim Sahib for spending his time, mashallah ta'ala. A very detailed and very well researched presentation that he gave earlier on, and all of his questions that were answered by him, mashallah ta'ala, very well answered. Some of them, of course, he's given you the WhatsApp channel. So you can connect with that WhatsApp channel, inshallah ta'ala, and you can further access his research, inshallah. We'll conclude here, and I would like to thank all of you that have stayed here from beginning to end. I think we have made history in UK, right? Why? Because we've been in the masjid for 4 or 5 hours without langar, mashallah ta'ala. So I think we can have a nara for Masjid Ghosia. MashaAllah ta'ala, barakallah fikum. I think we'll have the other.